Now to officially begin, I'd like to welcome you all again, especially His Grace Bishop Siluan, who is a patron of this gathering as well as of this parish. This wouldn't be happening without his blessing and without his support. I would like to thank our beautiful sisters from the Cnstbl, or the Ladies Auxiliary, that prepared the lunch and that worked hard to prepare this day and every event that we host here. Also, Draj, our president, and all the members of the board that work very hard to provide programs like this one today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would like to pay my respect to elders past and present. It's with God's grace that we've been able to come together today to learn, to collaborate, and to support one another. Today's family seminar aims at providing our entire community with knowledge, skills, and understanding of raising a family in our current climate. The effects of outside influences, the role we play as parents, carers, and guardians of our children, but more importantly as supporters of one another as we begin to take this journey together with Christ by our side. Today is all about learning and interacting with one another. It's time to build community, build support networks, and know that every person in this room has the same questions about raising a family. So take this opportunity to build new networks, make new friends, and get to know the people around you today. Take yourself out of your comfort zone and talk with at least 3 people you have never met before and introduce yourself, share something interesting about yourself, and you'll be surprised who you'll meet. I encourage you to ask questions, seek clarification, and share your thoughts with us so that we can all learn from one another. Before we start with our first lecture, I would like to invite our Bishop, His Grace Bishop Siluan, to say a few words and to offer his blessings.
Thank you, Father Nemanja. Very reverend and reverend fathers, distinguished guests, dear brothers and sisters in Christ. It is my sincere pleasure, honor, and joy to greet you all this morning for this consecutive seminar dedicated to the Orthodox family in the organization of St. Nicholas Serbian Orthodox Church in Blacktown and under the patronage of our beloved Metropolitanate. It is a Serbian Orthodox Church's desire to reach out to all its faithful across Australia and New Zealand, to all people seeking to drink from the fountain of life given to us in Christ through His Holy Church, to reach out to our youth, to all our faithful, especially our families, young and old, to help them grow and mature in Christ, to give them the much needed support and courage in living out the gospel of Christ truthfully. In light of the above, I would like to begin by acknowledging the efforts of one of my younger clergy, the Very Reverend Father Nemanja Marjanovic, who is the parish priest of St. Nicholas Serbian Orthodox Church here in Blacktown, who was quick to respond to the above spiritual task and take the initiative of reaching out to our faithful and especially our young families by way of organizing this seminar dedicated to the Orthodox family, which looks like, God willing, becoming an annual event in the calendar of our church. I thank him as his bishop and archpastor for his innovative labors in the ministry of God's vineyard. In like manner, I would like to thank and acknowledge the efforts of Mr. Dragoljub Brkljac, the president of the church community of St. Nicholas Church, and his committee for supporting Father Nemanja with this initiative. I would also like to thank all of our beloved sponsors for making this seminar possible. A special thank you is also reserved for all our guest speakers here today, the Very Reverend Father Nenad Ilich and his wife Anastasija Ilich, the very esteemed Dr. Ana Tokanovic and Mr. Simon Khoury, or Khoury if it's pronounced Khoury. Thank you for enriching us and blessing and gracing us with your presence today. As my speech this morning is envisaged to be more of an opening statement or homily about the Orthodox family rather than a formal lecture, I will endeavor to briefly touch upon what I believe are some important markers or pointers concerning the topic of Orthodox family. when we want to examine something in the Orthodox Church, the experience of the Church teaches us that we are to approach each object as double-sided, that we are to look beyond that which is visual, beyond the societal definitions and interpretations, in seeking to discern the proper meaning of things. We are to seek the logos to ine, the principle of being, the signature of God's word in creation, which will give us the ontological trajectory of everything within creation. In this way, we will come to a profound understanding of the subject in question, and as a result of this, we will be able to put it to good or proper use. The same applies when we approach the topic of the Orthodox family. We seek to learn what constitutes an Orthodox family. What is its logos to ine, its principle of being, its purpose and end goal? In order to achieve this, we will turn to our trusted sources, the Holy Scriptures and Holy Tradition, the sacramental experience and life of our Church. In this context, the best place to begin would be the sacrament, the Holy Sacrament of marriage, as it clearly defines the ethos and telos, or the purpose of a Christian family. This sacrament, which is infused with various biblical passages from the Old and New Testament, tells us that it is not good for man to be alone. This statement from the book of Genesis communicates to us a profound anthropological truth, that man is created as a communal creature, a saborno biće, an ecclesial creature, crkveno biće. This is a logical outcome of man being created in the image and likeness of God, a triune God. In fact, the sacrament points to marriage itself being an icon of the Church, a microcosm of the macrocosm, the grand narrative of God's purpose and calling for mankind and creation as a whole, for it to be a church in which God may be all in all. 1 Corinthians 5:15-28. So at the base level, we see the human person as a composite creature, a composite being, a small church, a small ecclesia. We subsequently see this pattern repeating itself at all levels of human existence. Man is called to live a life of communion, to be in communion with God and his fellow neighbor through the Eucharistic fellowship of the Church, but we see this also being exhibited in the sacrament of marriage and monasticism. Therefore, marriage is in fact a repetition of the cosmic order, but at a smaller scale. This is why St. Paul calls marriage a great mystery, alluding to the mystery of the Church and Christ's relationship with it. Ephesians 5:32. If therefore marriage is an icon of the Church, it is an icon of Christ's relationship with the Church, his bride. This then sets the foundations and becomes a map for the inner dialectic of life within marriage and the family unit. At the heart of a Christian marriage, and this also is for Christian life in general, love, as given and defined in the example of Christ, is what should govern marriage. It is at the heart of a Christian marriage. St. Paul, speaking to the Ephesians, says that Christ gave himself up for her, his beloved church. So this love is sacrificial. It is martyric. The sacrament of marriage calls us to love one another, not according to the manner of the world, which regularly abuses this sacred word, but according to the example given to us in Christ, who defines love as a self-giving service to the other, a sacrifice of self for the well-being of the other. The mutual submissions St. Paul speaks of in his epistle to the Ephesians, where wife is to submit herself to husband, and likewise husband to wife, is the expression of this Christ-like dialectic of love as a ministry of self-giving to one another. We can therefore deduce that Christian marriage, as an icon of Christ's relationship with his church, has the cross as its central tenet, because there can be no true love without sacrifice. If we try and avoid the cross, we will not be able to make progress in love and as a result of that in our marriage. Because only he who suffers, as Elder Emilianos of Simonopetra states, can truly love. This can be quite paradoxical for many today, who have been groomed to perceive marriage as a convenient contract or social arrangement, as a rigid dichotomy where we can pursue our individual interests with minimal sacrifice. The sacrament of marriage calls two different people to become one flesh, whilst preserving their personal idiosyncrasies, which is again true of the church, in which many become one body whilst remaining unique in their personhood. Marriage is therefore the creation of a new man, where two become one body, where the wife or husband are an integral part of each other's being. They are an addition which brings about the completion of the whole. The Bible is clear about this when Adam speaks of Eve, the bone of my bones and body from my body. In fact, the Orthodox sacrament of marriage speaks of three being joined. Husband takes his wife, and the wife the husband, but both are to accept Christ as the author of their marriage and the author of their life. The Orthodox family, growing on these proper foundations, becomes a co-creator. It works with God in the realization of God's grand narrative for creation to become a great church. The Orthodox family, as an image of the church, is called to bear the fruits of the church. If the church is called the Ark of Salvation, the family should produce this environment and be a vessel of it. The parents are called to put on the image of Christ to make it manifest in their family as an icon of the church. Parents are called to a sacred priesthood within the family, to nourish and cultivate the hearts of their children, to labor as the Apostle Paul did among the Galatians, to whom he writes, "My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you." Galatians 4:19. Parents are called to sow the seed of Christ, his gospel, in the hearts of their children by emulating the sacrificial example of self-giving given to us in Christ. What we see happening in the church is what should be happening in marriage as a small church. If love, in its Christian definition of self-giving and sacrifice, a willing martyrdom is the essence of marriage, then this is by definition what should govern the inner order and life of marriage, and by extension, the life of a family. Christian marriage cannot be without ascesis, as this is the case also for monasticism and Christian life in general. Therefore, marriage should be perceived first and foremost as a vehicle of salvation, a journey along the narrow path leading to heaven. In conclusion, I would like to add that it is never too late for us to come back to the proper phronema, the proper understanding and living out of marriage as is revealed to us in Christ and his church. Today can be the day in which we make a difference, in which we begin to shape our family according to the image and likeness of the church as the ark of salvation and the grand narrative of creation. My prayers are that this year's seminar, dedicated to this vitally important topic, will be of benefit to all who have come to learn and be reminded of the profound place and role the family unit has within society and in God's grand plan of salvation. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Grace. That was very inspirational and beautiful words. A lot of things to consider for all of us. Thank you for that input. Also, before we invite our first speakers, our dear guests, I'd like to say our thanks to the sponsors that made this day possible. And that's first and foremost the Orthodox funerals. it's I don't know, maybe it's a bit ironic, but it is. This was the man that stands behind this company. I'm sure you all know him very well, Mr. Anthony Jeffrey. He was the first one when he heard of us organizing a family seminar. He asked, "How can I help?" I said, "Well, you know, we would like to bring some people over from Europe, and we need money to pay for their tickets, to pay for their accommodation." He said, "How much do you need? I'll pay for it." And without him, this would be impossible. So I'd like to thank Mr. Anthony Jeffrey and Orthodox Funerals. They support not only this, but everything that happens in the Serbian community throughout the years. And they're great supporters of our church and of the whole Serbian community. On the same note, equally dedicated to this church and the Serbian community is Miss Television and Mr. Zoran Podinic. His cameras are here right now and working on this. They've advertised this seminar for free, and they've created so much artwork for it, and they were here last year, they supported this year, and hopefully next year as well. Also Beo Radio, Beo Travel Vesti, that are covering this for the Serbian community. A special thank you to a little company called Creative Sauce, and Ms. Mira Rajkovic, who is here today also taking photos, that will have this memory with us for a long time. And last but not least, also the Center for Study of Orthodox Monarchism that also participated in covering the costs of this event today, and is organizing another event that's going to be here today with the same guests. Tomorrow. Tomorrow evening we'll have a public lecture that's going to be free, open to everyone, and in Serbian language. And the title is The Price of Yugoslavia, and our lecturer will be Father Nenad. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Father Nenad Ilich and Mrs. Anastasija Ilich. Father Nenad is a priest, a movie and theater director, writer, editor with extended experience in the media, a lecturer and an advisor in different areas. After graduating at the Academy of Drama Arts, he worked as a director in Belgrade theaters as well as all over Serbia. He worked as a television director and editor. He was ordained a deacon after theology studies in Belgrade in 1996. And from 2000, he worked mostly on writing and directing for TV and film, as well as large scenography undertakings on a big scene or open space. He also worked as an editor of different printed and electronic publications, missionary endeavors, media missions, etc. Father Nenad is an author of many drama adaptations, essays, and one novel, Carigradski Drum, the Constantinople Road, as well as many other books about the church and Serbian national issues. He is an author of screenplays and editor and the director of documentaries Saint Bishop Nikolai of Serbia and Ava Justin, as well as several similar TV series. He's an active social media contributor with a very popular Facebook page where he regularly publishes his texts and moderates discussions on church and national issues since 2014. From 2017, he works as a lecturer of creative productions at the Faculty of Contemporary Arts in Belgrade. And in 2018, he was ordained a priest in Paris, France, and appointed a parish priest in Amsterdam, Netherlands. He and his wife Anastasija have 17 books together, and you'll be able to buy some of them today and tomorrow, and 4 children, which are not for sale. And his wife Anastasija is, her biography is equally impressive, if not more. She was born in 1968 in Bor, in Serbia. She was a student of her generation in the elementary school and was accepted to the Faculty of Drama Arts in Belgrade after 3rd year of high school. She graduated there in 1990, starred in theater, TV, and film, started studying theology at Belgrade Theological Faculty in 1993. She's a member of Byzantine Choir St. John Damascene, publishes widely in theological and other journals. She worked as a chanter and scripture teacher for 2 years in the cathedral in Vranje. And at the time, she was an associate of the magazine, a very popular and significant magazine, Iskon. She's a co-author of the Catechism Handbook Tajanstveno putovanje, The Mystical Journey, as well as 16 titles in the encyclopedia series Slava. And she has a book, Serbian Code, Srpski Kod, and many theater productions for children. She received her Master's of Theology degree from Belgrade Theological Faculty in 2011. From 2003, she's the director of the production house Opet I Opet. She's a lecturer in personal development workshops at the Alpha and Omega Club in Belgrade. occasionally participates in the big scene events of mostly ecclesial character, and from 2018 she's in charge of a choir at St. Nicholas Church in Amsterdam and participates in creating parish programs. She's married to Father Nenad Ilich, with whom she has 4 children, Pavle, Jelisaveta, Bogdan and Natalia. Please join me in welcoming both of them to the lectern.
Thank you, Father Nemanja. First, I wish to express my gratitude to His Grace Vladika Siluan, to Father Nemanja, and to all of you, brothers and sisters, for the opportunity of being with you today and sharing some thoughts about such an important and most crucial topic for a great many of us, marriage. Rarely does a human institution have such universality as it does with the institution of marriage. Marriage has been prevalent in all meridians, in all cultures, since time immemorial, and it is likely that till the end of time, and perhaps afterwards, the human race will be united through marriage. As a social, religious, and legal community that regulates rights and obligations between spouses, their children, and in-laws, marriage has traditionally been understood in our Western culture mainly as a union of 2 people of the opposite sex, through so-called union of table and bed. Other cultures and modern times have developed different customs, so today we have a whole range of forms of marriage community. Marriage is thus generally understood as a monogamous community in Western societies, while in other parts of the world, marriage can occur as a polygamous institution as well. The most common case is in the form of polygyny, a man with several spouses, with some societies tolerating polyandry, a wife with several spouses. Traditional opposite-sex marriage has been opposed by the concept of same-sex marriages in modern time, which hasn't stopped causing controversy ever since. The first country to legalize same-sex marriage is our country of residence, the Netherlands, which did so in 2001. According to the partners being a part of the same or different social group, tribe, nation, class, religious community, marriage can be endogamous or exogamous. Depending on whether it is made before a spiritual, religious, or secular authority, we distinguish religious and civil marriage. Thus, in Christianity, we have church marriage, nikah in Islam, nisuin in Judaism, and various other names in other faith traditions. It's interesting to compare the examples of Serbia and Australia regarding representation of church and civil marriage. Until the First World War, marital law in Serbia was under the jurisdiction of Serbian Orthodox Church, which means that marriages were conducted solely by the church authority and automatically recognized by the civil ones. During communism, church marriage was practically forgotten, and after the 1990s, it experienced a kind of renewal. Nowadays, most of newlywed couples practice both church and civil weddings. Australia has also seen a dramatic change in the type of marriage ceremony performed over the past 100 years. In 1902, over 96% of weddings were performed by religious ministers, and there were very few civil servants and celebrants. In 1999, 51% of weddings were conducted by civil servants and celebrants. In 2017, 78% of weddings were conducted by civil servants and celebrants, showing this is currently the preferred type of marriage ceremony by Australians. When we talk about different types of marriage, we cannot but mention the extramarital union, the informal or common law marriage, which is increasingly equated with marriage in the legislation of Western countries. And lastly, the marriage of convenience, which has always been present, in recent time is becoming more and more common, this time through so-called DINK couples, double income, no kids. When it comes to the religious aspect of marriage, we again have a great variety. Hinduism deals with marriage in greatest detail and distinguishes as many as 8 types of marriage. In its caste system, endogamous marriage within the same caste, and arranged marriages. Buddhism, however, is completely indifferent to marriage, which is considered a totally secular thing. Islam encourages Muslims to marry and has a complex marital law, which sees marriages polygamous but limits the number of women to 4, which in practice is mainly related to the financial standing of the husband. When it comes to understanding the marriage in Christian culture, which is of particular interest to us, it is mainly based on a combination of Old Testament, Judaist tradition, and Roman law, re-envisioned by the New Testament good news of the coming of the kingdom of God that fundamentally changes all human relationships, including marriage. The Old Testament understanding of marriage was based, on the one hand, on the blessing of God and the promise to Father Abraham that great many people would descend from him. So the goal of marriage was seen in giving birth. Accordingly, all types of marriage were tolerated: monogamous, polygamous, levirate, marrying your brother's widow, and even concubinage, while infertility was considered a curse. On the other hand, in the story of Genesis, in Song of Songs, in the prophetic books, we find the ideal of a monogamous marriage based on the eternal love of a man and a woman. God's idea of humanity is such: man is created as a couple, both male and female, to live eternally in communion with God. This remains the ideal of Christian marriage to this day. In Song of Songs, we have a magnificent ode to marital carnal love, in which Christ's love for the church is reflected and which seems to best be described using these terms. And whenever we are embarrassed by the artificially imposed juxtaposition of marriage and monasticism and think of the inferiority of married life, let us remember that, as stated in the documents of the recently held Cretan Council, marriage is considered to be the first institution of divine law. Roman law saw marriages as treaty, based on the consent of the 2 free parties. Not only has the whole Western world inherited this understanding of marriage as an agreement to this day, but the Church itself, when it comes to its members, respected the marriage contract concluded in this way. For almost a millennium, the Church didn't recognize any separate marriage rite, wedding, except for the newlywed participating in a Eucharist, thus having their marriage confirmed and recognized by the Church community. It wasn't until the 10th century, based on the imperial decision that made church marriage not only compulsory but also the only legally valid form of marriage for all citizens of the Byzantine Empire, that the formation of a special marriage ceremony was brought on. However, up until the 15th century, the wedding took place during the liturgy, with the participation of the bride and groom in the Eucharist, in Holy Communion as the climax. Remains of this custom are represented by a common glass that is approached by the spouses at a wedding. We have now peeked into the source and looked at the form, but what is in essence? What is the new thing that is revealed in the Gospel about the union of husband and wife? Let's take a look at what else the Cretan Council says about marriage, which the fathers apparently considered an important enough topic to include it in the synod documents. The marriage of man and woman, which was blessed in paradise, became a holy mystery, as mentioned in the New Testament, where Christ performs his first sign, turning water into wine at a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and thus reveals his glory. The mystery of the indissoluble union between man and woman is an icon of the unity of Christ and the Church. Thus, the first institution of the divine law, the manifestation of God's original will for man through visible action, the holy mystery, as the manifestation of a new substance in Christ, makes marriage an institution of the future kingdom, a way in which we will continue to exist even then. Water of the agreement has been turned into wine of love, which, as the apostle says, never ceases. Man stopped being alone, two became one flesh, the little church, just as the Son of God, by the incarnation in Christ, stopped being only God, but also became a man, thus giving his faithful people the gift of becoming one flesh with him. The mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church, the apostle will say in the epistle to the Ephesians, in the famous section read at the wedding ceremony. So, if everything is so beautiful and sublime and sacrilegious, and if love never ceases, then how come there is such a crisis of marriage and love? Why is it that when we talk about marriage, we can't not talk about divorce too? Christians also get divorced, and our church, while allows divorce, also strives to preserve the early Christian maximum of understanding marriage as an eternal union of husband and wife. Back in the Old Testament, there are conflicting views between the law of Moses that permits divorce and prophetic maximism. For I hate divorce, says the Lord, the God of Israel, as Malachi conveys. The Gospels bring such a maximalist line to the fore. Referring to Moses' permission to divorce, Jesus, according to Matthew's testimony, says that it was allowed because of the hard-heartedness of the Old Testament man's heart. In one other place, he also opposes divorce, saying that the husband makes the woman he dismisses an adulteress. Paul decisively communicates the Lord's commandment that the wife shouldn't be separated from her husband. For a long time, divorce was a taboo in a world shaped by Christian faith. The Catholic Church didn't allow divorce until recently, and it still has rigorous treatment for the people in their second marriages. Divorce rates are still lower today in traditionally Catholic social environments. The explosion of divorce since 1970s up to this day testifies to the profound crisis that marriage has faced. The causes are various: universal secularization, individualism, feminist ideology, the so-called sexual revolution of the 60s, but also recognition of consensual divorce in the legislation. Paradoxically, in a time in which love is recognized as the main motive for marriage, as a Christian value par excellence, and in which the talk of love came to bloom, marriage suffered the most. Does this tell us about the unsustainability of the concept of marriage out of love in the post-Christian era, or about simply forgetting what love is? Before seeking an answer to that question, it might not be a bad idea to look at divorce statistics. Figure 1 shows us marriage rates. In OECD country, OECD is a large economic union. So, in almost all OECD countries, marriage rates have declined over the past few decades. We can see data for 1970 marked by white dots, for 1995 marked with black dots, and for 2017 marked with blue lines. In 1970, most of the countries had marriage rates of somewhere between 7 and 10 marriages per 1,000 people. By 1995, marriage rates had fallen to around 5 to 7 marriages per 1,000 people, and in many countries they have continued to fall since, which simply means that less and less people are getting married. In Portugal, for example, the marriage rate halved between 1995 and 2017, from 6.6 to 3.3, and only Ireland, Latvia, Lithuania, the Slovak Republic and Sweden have seen marriage rates increase since 1995. So we see Portugal and its marriage rates, and what did I say? Latvia, Lithuania, third from the left, Latvia with black spot on the middle, Lithuania, Slovak Republic, never mind, my talent is not in this area. So only those countries have seen some increase since 1995. Let's go to figure 2. This figure shows change of the average age of getting married. Declining marriage rates have been accompanied by increases in the average age of those getting married, from 22 for women and 27 for men in 1970 to 30.2 and 32.5, which is now the average age of getting married. So we can see the increase from white spots over black to the top of blue lines. In some countries, like Sweden, for example, it goes to over 36 years. And let's see where Australia, does anyone see Australia? Here it is. This is male age. Australia is always somewhere over the average, but this time a little lower than average. Oh, this is OECD average, this black line, and this is Australia. Somewhere about 32 years for men. So let's go further. Figure 3 shows divorce rates. Declining rates of marriage have also been accompanied by increases in rates of divorce. Divorce rates vary considerably across countries, from as low as 0.9 divorces per 1,000 people in Chile, I can find Chile easily, to 3.1 divorces per 1,000 in Latvia. And Russia as an absolute recorder in divorce rates. But in comparison to 1970, most of the countries have divorce rates that are higher now than they were in 1970, even doubled, but in approximately half of the countries, rate is lower than in 1995. This isn't, unfortunately, an encouraging factor, but more of a consequence of declining marriage rates and increasing of the average age of those getting married. In the 70s, the lowest rates are found in some traditionally Orthodox and Catholic countries, such as Romania, Greece, Mexico, Portugal, and that's it. But they later increased significantly. You can see the increase to the top of blue lines. On the other hand, communist Catholic countries, as we may say so, however, Croatia, Slovenia, Hungary and Poland, Slovenia and Croatia, Poland and Hungary Black, have a relatively stable situation. According to a recent research in the USA, this is interesting, one of the strongest factors predicting divorce rates is the concentration of conservative or evangelical Protestants in certain county. Divorce rates goes even to 70 per thousand in some areas, which is extremely high. However, among devoted Protestants, percentage of divorce is lower, 38% versus 60% among traditional ones. So for the end of my part, let's see some data for Australia and Serbia. In 1970, the crude marriage rate in Australia was 9.6 marriages per 1,000 residents. In 2017, the crude marriage rate has dropped to 4.6 marriages per 1,000 residents. The number of divorces is 2 per 1,000 people. The divorce rate has increased by 5.2% from 2016 to 2017. The average marriage lasts for 12 years in Australia, and the most common age for getting divorced is 45.5 for males and 42.9 for females. In 1975, 67.6% of all divorces involved children, while in 2016, only 64% of all divorces in Australia involved children. In Serbia, in 2018, the number of marriages per 1,000 residents is 5.2, which is somewhere above the average. The average age at which people get married is 34.2 years for men and 31.1 years for women, which is also a little above the OECD average value. The number of divorces per 1,000 residents is 1.4, which is lower, and that means that about a quarter of marriage in Serbia is being divorced. The average age of a man getting divorced is 44.1 years, and for women it's 40.5 years. In Croatia, every third marriage ends in divorce, with the most divorces being in split, as much as 40%, while in Zagreb it is 28% of divorces compared to the number of weddings. The shortest marriage ever lasted 3 minutes and was concluded and divorced in Kuwait. If you are a dancer or a bartender or a message therapist or gaming cage worker or gaming service workers, you're in a high risk of getting divorced. But if you are a farmer or pediatrist or a member of the clergy or an optometrist or an agricultural engineer, you don't have to be bothered. Agricultural engineers, rate of divorce among them, data are for USA, is only 1.78%. What can we conclude, besides that we should all immediately become farmers? Even though we are aware of the significance given to marriage in our culture, we find it hard to resist the flow that carries us along with the world we live in. After all, even if we who go to church were completely immune to the temptations of the world, would we be satisfied with that? Would we be able to say, let the rest of the world perish, it is important that we be saved? Is that our Christian call? What can we, the Orthodox, offer both ourselves and others in the sphere of marital relations? And what is, though ancient, effective for the future that lies ahead? More about it from Father Nenad.
The problem of the current marriage crisis that we have heard about from Anastasija would be to say that marriage has no real dignity, either in the world culture or in the church. And rarely did he have one in full, except for inspirational concrete examples. The great love stories that have colored European culture, the culture of the West, and to a great extent the world culture, are not about conjugal love. Art and popular culture are dominated by stories of great unhappy love. The most famous are the stories of romantic love that make lovers die. Tristan and Isolde, Romeo and Juliet, Anna Karenina. If the story of love, after interesting twists and turns, ends with famous "they lived happily ever after," neither art nor popular culture is much concerned. Words from the beginning of Tolstoy's novel Anna Karenina are widely known and often cited. All happy families look alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. Although, in fact, unhappy families are more similar to one another than happy ones, as they repeat the same patterns of dysfunctional behavior and unhealthy emotions. The popular interpretation of these words leads people to unconsciously accept the attitude of the boredom of happy married life. Similar to the banal interpretations of the static boredom of life in paradise, that is the kingdom of heaven, and the attractions in hell, present in many jokes, or the attraction of the passions that in a sick pattern trap a person in his or her egoism in relation to generally accepted boredom of purity, kindness, sacrifice, and mutual service. Why are stories of romantic, unhappy love much more influential in world culture than stories of sacrifice, of the quiet happiness of conjugal love? It will be rooted in religion, in fact. Western culture originated at the root of Christianity, but also of pre-Christian paganism and later Christian heresies. In the Middle Ages, in the West, one of the periods of the crisis of Christian uprising brought a cult of knightly love, the love for which knight dies. That kind of love has become the basis of novels, romanticism, love tragedies, as well as of contemporary literary and cinematic melodramas. The failure of man to become through the love near to God love, the Western defeat in the preservation of the original Christian faith in the possibility of touching God and man except after death, puts the value of the dead ahead of the value of life. Do not knowing Eastern Christian asceticism and the belief that God and our earthly life can be approached through his uncreated energies to approach God, the heroes of Western culture have no other choice but to die. God remains inaccessible to man. Just as monk dies for the world, so does a knight for his love for a lady, a love that is impossible for him for some serious reason here on earth. In fact, the only love that makes sense is the love for which one dies, for which one is prepared to die. Other love is not scored. Of course, this road is open only to the best of people, so to say, because others remain weak and should not go that way. Compared to the highest representatives of culture, those who will find the love of God in their own deaths most people have a conscious or unconscious shame because of their weakness that they tend to enjoy marital and family happiness, because they are prone to an unworthy topic, a topic of a lower rank. And so, an insensible dad took the place of God. In the West, God love became God death. If you don't die for love, you didn't love either. You just lived a pale echo of love in which there is no greatness, only shame. No wonder Western civilization has over time rejected such a God, the authoritative God of death. Romantic, unhappy love couples from the Western centuries-old tradition do not really love each other. They love the impossible love itself, behind which lies the masked death that calls into its dark embrace. Not a trace of the joy of resurrection that poured into the world 2,000 years ago. This spiritual cultural development has also led to paradoxical phenomenon that marital erotica has become a taboo topic in Western culture. In contrast, the erotic love of extramarital couples has gained a large space that is still expanding. Whether lovers will die for their love, as was the obligation at the beginning of the development, or they will just remain miserable with painful memories and the awareness that they could not preserve true love, which is the case in contemporary melodramas. The bond of erotica, mysticism, and holiness present in the East spilled over into early heresies and into the West. Marriage remained formally sacred, but actually emptied of holiness and left to the banal everyday life. Both mystical eroticism in the wake of Eastern religions and modern commercial pornographic banalization of eroticism are kept only for the extramarital realm, for lovers, not for married people. In any case, the modern consciousness of marriage is more influenced by this romantically morbid drift, even if it has received much more banal translation today in this cynical time than it contains the joy of common path to the kingdom of God and of being present here and now. The cult of romantic love in its contemporary melodramatic form or in the form of romantic comedy, those ones with Hugh Grant, Julia Roberts, and such kind of actors, introduces another plot that marries another plot. And this is revived and banalized ancient myth of soulmates. Occasionally, it is allowed in the arts of popular culture before that lived happily ever after, that lovers, after a series of problems, nevertheless arrive at a marriage that promises permanence and happiness, to overcome obstacles, but only if they are elected. If they got their soulmate on the lottery of some kind. A certain measure of heroism and overcoming everyday small problems is also sought here, but this is possible only on the basis of their chosen, on the basis of faith. For example, at the beginning of the typical popular romantic comedy, we saw a lot of those movies, we are introduced to the two who are made for each other. Really made for it. We see that. They're soulmates that by some miracle fate have brought them together. It's miracle. Hollywood brought them. Not miracle, but it's visible like that. However, unlike us viewers, they do not understand it wandering around, both of them unsuccessfully trying to forge relationships with someone else, in the end, to our satisfaction, to have a happy ending. It looks nice and harmless. Romantic comedy was a problem. If it doesn't throw a worm of doubt at us. Is this person next to us just my soulmate, just to me? Is this person next to me just my soulmate? Worm start to work. Is it that person just one in a million or a billion that fits me perfectly? Is this the person? If not, then why waste time trying to be happy with her? If I'm not happy, don't I have the right and even the obligation to look further for love? No matter what moment I realized I had made the wrong choice, soon after beginning or after years of marriage, that is simply not fulfilling for me. No matter family I made in meantime with that person who is not completely my soulmate. Or maybe it's just the two of us not related enough. The modern age is afraid of death, for which there is no solution but to prolong life with the help of science. Modern people doesn't like staring at the death. The romantic ideal of love, for which one dies, and the unbearable god of death are replaced by the unjust god of destiny, who bestows happiness only on some. It is up to us to keep our lottery number and to participate in all draws. Little else besides depend on us. Although we cannot love God of destiny, he at least comforts us with the release of responsibility and the blame for our possible failure. It abolishes the division into heroes and lower categories. We are all in the same situation, equally powerless in the face of destiny, real democracy. And marriage is getting weaker, as we heard. It begins to be perceived as a boring and unerotic, lower-ranking association whose perhaps comfortingly pleasing effect depends not on us but on fate. No wonder statistics tell us what Anastasija introduced us to. The relationship of man and woman will be important for the rest of history, but already it is getting forms that have less and less to do with marriage, and there will be new challenges in the emergence of virtuality, the matrix. For now, the state of contemporary art, the state of civilization as a whole, does not promise much when it comes to preserving marriage, but the topic of marriage is always a certain challenge. Who knows, one day maybe, in this neoliberal atmosphere, it will be heroism to defend marriage. Perhaps art then perceives the theme of marriage as something inappropriate, as a theme suitable for provoking and breaking the cliché against marriage, revealing an area for the courage of creators. Strange are the rotations of the wheel of history. We will see. Now, let's look at the church's response to this situation, its defense of marriage as a saint institution. Embraced with the world who wants to bring in the kingdom of God, the church unfortunately often suffers from the diseases of the world. Awareness of this danger gives rise to certain ecclesiastical reactions that are supposed to distance believers from the evil world. When it comes to marriage, the church's answer to the problems of modernity goes from stubbornly insisting on poorly understood Old Testament obligations to God and to people, the obligation to have children, to a moralistic insistence of controlling fornicatory passions and challenging them into hygienic marital relationship. Although neither the Lord nor the Apostle told us so, we imply that monasticism is superior life path than married life. That true approach to God occurs only in the monastic endeavor, and to the marital people in the cities and villages remains only the mediation of others, the saints, who them as eternally minors bring to God. Something similar of that we saw in art, lovers, long-standing advantages over married couples. The problem is that most of the time we do not tackle the full dimensions of the problem. We do not come up with creative and inspirational answers, so instead of strengthening ourselves in relation to the forces of the world and treating the world's diseases, we are often satisfied with the establishment of a fenced-in reservation where believers try to live, at least partially, while counting a normal life in the world. It is difficult for men of today, soaked in meaningful and senseless liberalism, to obey the commandments. It's difficult to obey the commandments for sure now. The healing commands of God require us in the church to continually interpret and refresh the form in which we transmit them. They asked us to make them desirable. Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the keeping of fire. Should be the motto of all creative traditionalists. And the non-creative transmission of tradition is actually a betrayal of tradition, real betrayal of tradition. The extinguishing of living flame, the transformation of valuable achievements in preserving and making sense of life in ordinary museum ashes. Where should we go in safeguarding the strength of marriage and increasing its attractiveness for at least for believers, and maybe for the wider circle? Perhaps the time has come for a drastic re-evaluation of marriage within the church. Instead of appealing to the lesser evil, not to foment the passions, to the depth of serving the community by giving birth to children, maybe not to look at marriage as a duty, not as restriction, as it's seen by increasing number of young people, but also by those who they are no longer young, but to be reminded of potentially attractive force of marriage as a form of connection. Perhaps in times of self-help, life coaches, instant sense of life for individuals, it is best to concentrate on the mystical potential of the marital relationship now and in the future. We all know the two greatest commandments Christ left us, which contain all the other commandments. Until the second coming of Christ, they will remain an indelible, perfect signposts to every believing person. First one, as we know, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your might. And another, second, love your neighbor as yourself. The problem is with all the perfect, simple truths that we accept with both mind and heart, that is not easy to live by. Perfect as diamond, they sometimes seem difficult to access. Nevertheless, let us try to approach our subject through these simple and comprehensive commandments of God. The love of God, as love, contains itself the love of everything created by God, everything that has the power of life in itself. according to all nature, plants, animals, and of course humans. If we do not put the love of God first, we will easily seek love into the limiting self-love that leads to decay instead of the love that opens us to eternity. That the love of the invisible and incomprehensible God would not remain merely a desire and idea, God, in the second commandment, warns us of our fellow men through whom we specifically maintain both the love of God and the love for ourselves. The neighbor has been given to us to see and maintain in him the love of God, but also to know and love God himself through our relationship with him. Love your neighbor as yourself can be used as a commandment we do not ask about, which we simply obey. And in the spirit of today, it can be viewed softer as a signpost given by the Father of us all, full of love, to be analyzed and broken down so that we can more easily lead our life path through this sign of love. If you don't love your neighbor, you don't love yourself either. If you don't love yourself, you don't love your neighbor. If you don't love God above and before your neighbor and yourself, you do not really love yourself or your neighbor. Simple. And we can immediately apply this to the marriage as a couple of excellence in the relationship of loved ones, man and woman. Not the only, but certainly one of the most difficult relationships in which even becomes two with one body. This era, in the spirit of consumerism and ease of choice, offers us various ways of self-help, self-improvement. It tries to teach us to love for ourselves and leaves love, marriage also, to chance or to reasonable rules. By consolidating individualism as the most appropriate ideology to govern and strengthen the consumer society, this civilization no longer tells us that we obtain eternity in God, who is love, through another, through our neighbor. And that love is achieved not by mere sentimentalism, but only by sacrificing one's own egoism, breaking the boundaries of one's self-isolation, by completely opening up for another. And in God, we are fulfilling the goal of our existence, the very thing we are created for. We ceased to be slaves to death. We also became love in eternity gods with the one God. Everything in the day-to-day relationships of man and woman, viewed from this perspective, can become a field of heroic struggle, a feat, mystical ascent. If loving necessarily involves sacrificing one's own egoism, where is it easier than in marriage to actually practice and achieve that renunciation? And where it is easier and faster than in marriage to immediately encounter the first clues of what that renunciation is? Where is it easier than in marriage and family to learn to serve another? And it is only the service that each of us discovers and develops his gifts, many of which he has never recognized before. It reaches its fullness. It is not by chance that Lord said, "He who among you is to be the first to serve all. He who serves the most, the greatest number, is the first in love." Open and filled with God, and he is grateful and he loves those he serves. There are differences between monasticism and world Christianity that should not be forgotten. Monastic recipes applied by worldly people to their lives can often be harmful. However, much of the ascetic experience of monasticism, which is special healing testimony within the church, can be used, if well translated and adapted to worldly life, by no means literally. It is a disaster when people, enthralled by the ideals of unmarried monks, apply some tips of struggle against fornication in their marriage. Coming from those who, in order to build a stronger connection with God, have voluntarily separated themselves from their potential partners as artists of special kind. But the knowledge of the passions recorded by desert fathers can be valuable in recognizing the elements of egoism we wish to sacrifice out of love for another. By restraining our passions, sacrificing some of their manifestations for the spouse we want to love, we at the same time strengthen love, being God more, grow ourselves spiritually. Thus, the spouse does not remain someone for whom we have to give up our passionate habits that have special place in our hearts, but becomes a valuable contributor to our liberation. They help us in a struggle against restraint of the freedom that comes for the action of passion. Help us in transformation of passion into creative manifestations of life forces. Help us in the whole spiritual growth. Man and wife as spiritual teachers, spiritual masters of one another. To reiterate that the passions of fornication must be approached with the caution in relations to the monastic instructions written for the monks. We must first remind ourselves that Orthodox Church has never deviated from corporeal touch. We do not preach incorporeal life, but resurrection in the flesh. Sex and erotica are not even banished from the Bible, only that they were not given a place as in the eroticized version of consumerism. More than that, in the coming time, when physicality itself is increasingly threatened by the integration of organisms and techniques, proteins and artificial substances, when touch is increasingly replaced by rituality, perhaps it is the practice of the Church that will be the basis of the struggle for the dignity of corporeal. Our faith enables us to touch Christ and his saints, to love them. Our faith tells us that we do not want to become incorporeal angels. Since God has placed man above the angels to unite both visible and invisible, material and immaterial, we set him up to become a God-man with Christ and in Christ. Our liturgy is based on something that cannot be replaced in virtual, holy communion with the body and blood of Christ. Touching and even touching the two bodies on the largest possible surface, such as in sexual love act, will in the future be an important topic for human survival. Touch is the most concrete expression of connection without which a human being cannot live. Just as the church view of marriage has changed over the time, so has the view of sexual love. In contrast to earlier times, today the greater danger of enslavement to lust, fornicatory passion, comes for the virtual zone of all kinds of pornography and present and future simulations of sex, than from the living and blessed relationship between man and woman. And of course, God didn't give people enjoyment of sex just to be motivated to reproduce. If it is a simple desire for others to enjoy, not to put ourselves in first place, sex can and should be a teacher of love and wonderful reward for love, not taboo. We need to think about all this if we truly believe that marriage is valuable, that it should be preserved and strengthened. It is only when we answer these questions and begin to deal with marriage in creative way and not just view marriage as a set of constraints, do we establish the opportunity to open up a new view of marriage to those in the church and those who intentionally or unintentionally we from the church let's testify. Marriage based on tradition, but not tradition covered with ash. On tradition that is based on keeping the flames, not worshipping the ashes. And to the world culture from which marriage came to the church for sanctification, a new, inspiring, mystical route of seeing love must be given. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you, Father Nenad and Anastasija. That was amazing. A great and very in-depth exploration of marriage from the very beginnings in different cultures, and a great summary of secularization of it as well, and the ecclesial view and the reflection from the Orthodox perspective. We'll continue now with a very I'm trying to find a word and not to say controversial, because we don't want this to be controversial. We want a very clear and very orthodox answer to an issue that is very topical to all parents and to all of those that are about to be parents. It's very hard these days to decide, and we live in a world that is full of confusion. And everyone has an opinion, and everyone is entitled to bring out their opinions with a lot of enthusiasm, explaining why do the kids should be or should not be vaccinated. Well, luckily for us, we have a professional to offer an answer in this area. Our next speaker for today is a very extraordinary member of the Serbian community, Dr. Ana Tokanovic. She's, her and her husband Slavko are also a doctor. If I'm not mistaken, there's the first Soya marriage in Australia.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And now with children coming as well. Yeah, very good. Ana, I'll just read a few examples from her resume that speaks volumes on the contributions to the biomedical sciences. Ana got her Bachelor of Biomedical Sciences from Monash University in Australia in 2004, and her honours in immunology from the Department of Immunology and Pathology of Monash University, Australia. I'm not even attempting to read this thesis title. There's too many complicated formulas there. She got her PhD at the Centre for Animal Biotechnology, the University of Melbourne, Australia, with a thesis title, The Mechanisms of Immune Response Induction Following Lung Vaccination. And she did a graduate certificate in tertiary training as well. She's a university lecturer with a long experience in the area, and who published widely in this area. But what's most important, she's... Can we please fix this somehow? Anyone? Goran, who is... The technicians are all outside. All right. What is the most important in her CV is that Ana is... Gorane, can you please, možeš molim te pobrinuti se za mikrofon, smanjiti malo zbog mikrofonije, previše kleče. Ana is not only an immunologist, she's not only an expert in the area, Ana is also a practicing Orthodox Christian. And it's very important for us to have this in a context of someone who's not only an expert in the area of immunology, but also an expert of in a way of living the Orthodox life. So please welcome Dr. Ana Tokanovic.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for having me here. I've come to you from Melbourne today. It's a bit of a temperature difference. It was 7 degrees this morning when I left my house, and it's a lovely 30 when I got here. So thank you very much for inviting me. So immunology is something that is, I guess, something that I've always been passionate about. I remember my first lecture in immunology, and I thought, oh wow, this is so... I often call it my first love. My husband gets a bit weary about that, but it is. It was the most amazing topic that I ever found in terms of science. And so I spent the next 15 years studying and working in it. So please feel free to ask questions as I go through. This is not a very formal talk. If I'm rushing over something and you want more clarification while I'm going, please raise your hand. Happy to explain things, and happy to chat afterwards as well if people have got specific questions. One thing to note, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm a science doctor. So don't ask me about specific health conditions because I'm unable to help. I should point out that my husband, who is a GP, did help me prepare this talk, so we should be covered. But yeah, please don't ask specific health questions because I can't help. So when people talk about immunology, these are the sorts of things that come up, right? So garlic. For most Serbs, this is one of the first associations, and you know, there might be a bit of truth in that, because if you eat a lot of garlic, people are not going to want to be anywhere near you. So in a way, I guess you'll be protected. And it does have some antimicrobial properties, but not really. But yeah, the Serbian Srpski antivirus, or the Serbian antivirus, that always gets me, you know, on Facebook. I always find it quite funny. But it's also about, when people think about immunology, it's, you know, it's sort of vaccines, kids being a bit unhappy about getting injections. So just wanted to, I guess, introduce the topic of immunology first. So what's an immune response? It is how your body deals with an infection, okay? It's when you get sick, how your body deals with that. How does it combat, how does it fight the infection, okay? And that infection could be bacteria, it could be a virus, it doesn't really matter what it is, it's how your body's responding to what's attacking it. A couple of terms that I'd like to introduce, and that we throw around in immunology quite a lot, and when people talk about vaccines and immunology, they always throw these words around, so just so you know what they are. So antigens are things that essentially infect you or that make you sick, okay? So they're substances which appear foreign and they cause your body to react, to respond. An antibody is your body's response to that antigen, okay? So antigen is the stuff that makes you sick, antibody is the stuff that your body makes to counteract that, okay? So two terms like that. The thing about antibodies is they're very specific, and we'll come to that later on. So you will only get an antibody against a particular thing. Don't want to confuse. Yeah. Anyway, go through the immune system. So all of these things, people might not think about the immune system in this way. You know, it might be more the garlic, the vaccines, but all of these body parts, they all form part of your immune system, which is essentially there to protect you from getting sick in the first place, right? So you try to get remain as healthy as possible for as long as possible. So you've got what we call these lines of defense, okay? So your first line of defense is your skin, intact skin, keeps stuff from getting into your body. You've got your mucous membranes, so your saliva and your tears, they've all got antibacterial enzymes that break down all sorts of infections so they can't get into your body. You've got your stomach acid. You've got a very low pH in your stomach, so hopefully if anything does come in, the low pH, the acidity will kill it off. It can't go anywhere further and cause issues for you. And hopefully people have got more good gut bacteria than bad ones, so they can outcompete each other. But these are all the things that I guess your body does to prevent you from getting sick in the first place. If and when you do, because we all do get sick, your body reverts to what we call the second line of defense, okay? So that's very non-specific. That's just your body saying, hey, something's gone in there, I've got an infection, let's try and clear this up, okay? So the sort of things that we get at this point is your white blood cells, but also a number of other things such as antimicrobial proteins and in the inflammatory response, but not really important. I guess what I wanted to show in here is that there's all sorts of cells that are involved in your body in keeping you healthy, okay? And they've all got different roles. So that second line of defence, there's about 10 different types of cells, and they're very non-specific. So, for example, the mast cell you see here, that's a really important cell in allergic reactions. So if you look at someone who's had an allergic reaction, you'll see their mast cells numbers go up. It won't tell you what sort of allergy it is, whether it's nuts, shellfish, who knows what else. So it's just a very, it's a very generic response of your body. Your neutrophils over there on the left, they're the sort of cell you'd find in an infection. It won't tell you whether it's a bacteria, whether it's influenza or salmonella or whatever else. It's an indication of inflammation. So that's what doctors quite often look at when they do your white blood cell counts. And they're looking at those numbers to see what exactly is happening in your body. Your third line of defence is really specific, okay? That's your body saying, hey, I recognise now what this is, what's inside of me, and I'm going to directly deal with you in a specific way. I'm going to make antibodies against this particular virus or this particular bacteria, depending on what the infection is. And you've got 3 types of cells in here. So B cells are the cells that make antibodies. So people often talk about antibody production after vaccines. So they're your cells that do that. And then you've got your T cells. They're more involved in viral infections, but also both. So I didn't actually want to spend this much time on this, but anyway, I think it's important just to, I guess, understand that there's quite a lot of things happening within the immune system, and there's a lot at play just keeping you healthy, and that your immune system is an awesome mechanism at getting rid of all sorts of infections. So a question I get all the time is, well, what's the point? Why do I vaccinate? Why should we vaccinate? Why not just expose ourselves naturally and build immunity like that? Few reasons. One of them would be making those antibodies that I've just spoken about. That's a very specific response of your body. That takes time and energy. Okay? So let's say you got the flu. Actually, no, let's go through this diagram. So we're looking at concentration of antibodies, and your initial exposure is when you, first time your body sees this infection, first time your body gets sick, let's say. And you can see that it takes, so where that timeline is, that's about 4 weeks. So it takes about 4 weeks for your body to actually start producing antibodies. Okay, it's not a very quick turnaround. So if you think about influenza, for example, if you get sick with influenza, influenza peaks at about 1 to 2 weeks. Okay, so that's when that infection is at its highest, and your body's just gearing up to start making those antibodies. So quite often, your body actually doesn't even get a chance to fight the infection because the infection is so quick and so aggressive. You don't get those 4 weeks. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we vaccinate. So let's take the example of a flu shot. So you've gone to your GP, you've got your flu shot. That's the first time. So that's your initial exposure. It's the first time your body's seen this virus. You make some antibodies, you're all good. You can see that this line never quite goes all the way down. So the antibody levels go up and then they go a bit down. It never hits 0. And the reason for that is when you make antibodies, you make these what we call memory cells. So your body remembers that it's seen this bacterial virus, and it keeps that memory circulating throughout your body constantly. So then, let's say 3 or 4 months later, you actually get the flu. And see what happens. See how quickly and how strongly your body now reacts. Okay, so that's your primary immune response is let's say the flu shot. So it's taken about 4 weeks to generate small amounts of antibodies, but because those memory cells are circulating throughout your body, when they see the actual virus, they go, hey, I know you, I've seen you, I've got antibodies for you, and the body just starts making them straight away. So it doesn't take 4 weeks, it takes a lot less. And that time can be crucial. That can be the difference between life and death, quite often. Okay, so that's one of the reasons. Yep.
Sorry, just
Yeah.
real quick question. Did those memory cells have a time frame? So when your body creates them, are they everlasting?
They are everlasting, but their numbers reduce with age. So some vaccines you need boosters every 10 years. So for tetanus, for example, they say every 10 years because after 10 years those numbers get really low and it gets a bit easier whether you get the protection. Others are a lot more longer lasting and others are shorter. So it really depends on the vaccine that we're talking about. But yeah, generally they should be there forever. In what numbers, that changes with age. Yep. So second reason why we vaccinate, and this one's really important, it's what we call herd immunity. So let's look at this lovely map of Australia on the left-hand side. In your red people are those that are infectious, so contagious. Your yellow people are those that are susceptible, so they're not sick, but they're not protected either, right? So when no one's immunised, disease goes from me to you to him to her, just flows around freely. Whatever disease it is, it doesn't really matter. It just flows around freely. When a few people are immunised, so we're looking at the middle one, the disease, those that are immunised are protected now, but this disease can still go from A to B to C to D because it can get around. But when the majority is immunised, and we normally say 90% is what we're aiming for, when the majority is immunised and someone gets infectious, for whatever reason, let's say they've just come from overseas and they've got an infection, that disease, that infection stops with them because it's got nowhere to go. It's hitting a wall, essentially, wherever it looks, because you're protected. My virus has got nowhere to go. Why is that important? It's important because there are people that are unable to get vaccinated for certain reasons. So kids under the age of 4 are generally considered their immune systems are still developing. Okay, so they're quite susceptible to a lot of diseases. And things such as measles, for example, kids can't get that until they're at least 12 months. So that's when they get the first shot of the MMR vaccine, the measles part. So for those 12 months, they're very vulnerable. Right? And then you've got your elderly. As you get old, your immune system tends to weaken, so you're unable sometimes to get vaccinated, or your immune response it's not that great. So you rely on others around you being protected so they can protect you. Also, people that are sick, quite often people that have got cancer or they're going any sort of cancer treatment, their immune systems are completely out of whack, and they're really susceptible to all sorts of infections. And so they, again, rely on the rest of the people around them being healthy and being protected because they can't take that vaccine. Okay, so those are just 2 reasons why we vaccinate. There's more. I'm happy to discuss. Just some numbers, because I'm a scientist and I like numbers. So essentially looking at the number of deaths in Australia from diseases that we actually vaccinate against, because I think it's good to remind people that these diseases are real, they existed here, and people unfortunately used to die from them. They don't so much anymore, so we don't see these sorts of things and we don't think it's real. It is very real. So if you look at, so the red arrows point, the red arrow indicates when a vaccine was introduced in Australia. And you can see for each of those conditions, so diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, it's just gone down. For some of them, we haven't had any deaths in quite some time. Others, unfortunately, so pertussis, that's your whooping cough. People would have heard of whooping cough, especially babies. So that unfortunately still gets around. And it's quite fatal for young babies. So I like this map. So this is a map from Netherlands. They had a measles outbreak in 2013. So if you look on the left, that's so the darker the red, the higher the incidence of measles. And your map on the right is looking at the rates of immunisation. And again, the darker the blue, the lower the rates. If you overlay those 2 maps, you can see that the hotspots are happening at the same spot. So where your immunisation rate drops below 90% or 95%, each disease is different. Measles, ideally 95, but other things we say 90%, you start to get outbreaks. Okay, people start to get sick. People always get...
Sorry, just in regards to the measles outbreak, how many deaths actually occurred as a result?
I don't know that one, but I can tell you, so in Samoa at the moment, there's a measles outbreak, I don't know if people are following, So this data is current as of Wednesday. I don't know what's happened since then. So as of Wednesday, 2,000 cases, 32 deaths, of which 28 were children under the age of 4. Average age for those children was 13 months, which is horrific. It is absolutely horrific, and I dare say those numbers could have gone up from Wednesday because they still haven't. Sorry?
And it's right next door.
And it's right next door. And it's a country that people travel to and from in Australia a lot for all sorts of reasons. And as a parent, it is extremely distressing to hear those sorts of things. Extremely distressing. So it is real. It does exist. We're just extremely lucky in this country that we don't see it. And it's come to the point that people are becoming, I guess, questioning, do we even need it because we can't see it and go somewhere if you dare. And then we can talk about these things. So I think it's really important to touch on this. So what's actually inside our vaccines? So antigens, those things that we spoke about earlier. So they're the things that your body recognises and says, hey, something foreign's inside me, I need to react against you. So it's either bacteria or virus. It's usually killed. Okay, so we don't ever put live organisms into you because that would be causing an infection. You either put killed organisms, so either dead bacteria, or what we say weakened germs. And by weakened, and by weakened we mean if the virus isn't able to cause that particular disease, it will just go inside your body, stir your immune system just a bit, but it can't cause that disease. You won't get the actual disease you're vaccinating against. That's what that refers to. Sometimes, and lately we've been doing fragments, so instead of putting whole bacteria viruses into your body, you just get fragments because it's new technology, it's cheaper, it's easier, all sorts of things. Adjuvants. So they're the things that actually cause the majority of your immune response. So if you think about it, if you're putting dead bacteria into you, your body's not really going to think much of that, and it's not really, it'll probably say, well, what's the point of me reacting against this? Because it's dead bacteria. There's not much danger here. So that's why you put the adjuvants in there to kind of draw attention locally and say, hey, immune system, there's stuff happening here, come over here. All those cells, you guys come over here and have a look and start creating an immune response. So that's what adjuvants do. Preservatives, so it's usually small amounts of alcohol, and the idea is to prevent contamination. So this, people might have heard of thimerosal, potentially used in vaccines in Australia, so with small amounts of mercury. That is no longer used in Australia. It hasn't been for the last 20 years. It is still widely used in other parts of the world. No study has ever been shown to, I guess, for the mercury component to be an issue, but because of the public pressure, they did remove that from the vaccines in Australia. But as I said, vaccines containing those components still used throughout the world today. Stabilizers, so the sort of things that prevent spoilage, so oil, a bit of oil or a bit of sugar, we're talking really, really small quantities here. Really, really, really small quantities in a single vaccine. Residues, so the sort of things that will remain from the manufacturing processes, and so as soon as I say formaldehyde, people go, oh my goodness, chemical, that's horrible. You actually make more formaldehyde in your body on a daily basis than what's in any of those vaccines. So it's a byproduct of metabolism. Your body quickly converts it to CO2, and it's out of your body. So it's not an issue for your body. And then the main component of the vaccine is usually just sterile water or a bit of saline that holds it all together. So how does it work? So vaccines, they train your immune system essentially to quickly act and clear out any bacteria or viruses. So the best analogy I've heard so far is think of an army. So think of your immune system as an army. An army that practices is better than one that doesn't, right? So the more your immune system practices, the better it gets. It's very simple. There's not much to it. So you normally inject vaccines, and as I've said, it's either weakened or dead bacteria, but it could be viruses as well. It's the same principle. Your white blood cells see this material, they start reacting against it, they start producing antibodies. So that if at some point later on in your life you see the same thing, your body will say, hey, I've seen you before, I've got those antibodies, off we go, quickly get rid of this before it becomes a health issue for you. Quickly, history of vaccines, one of the most powerful images I've seen. So you can see that when it was taken at the turn of the century, and it's to do with smallpox, which has luckily been eradicated. So 2 brothers, one got the vaccine and the other one didn't. Pretty clear which one did and which one didn't, I think. So this image I thought was really powerful, and it shows the difference between getting vaccinated and not. So what's smallpox? It's a horrendously contagious viral disease, causes blistering and scabs and skin. 30% mortality rate, which is quite high. Those that do survive it, or did survive it, would have large scars and blindness, and luckily declared eradicated by the World Health Organization as of 1980. So we don't vaccinate against this anymore, because it doesn't exist. But the reason I use smallpox is because that's how the idea of vaccination actually started. So a young English doctor noticed that cows had a form of pox, which is similar to smallpox. So he noticed that the women who were milking the cows, so the milkmaids, they'd only get this cowpox on their hands, but then they'd be fine with the other stuff, the smallpox. They'd never get the actual smallpox. And he thought that was interesting. And he thought, okay, well, maybe these two are then related. You know, these smallpox that people are getting and the cowpox that these milkmaids and the cows are getting. So what he did, extremely unethical, you would not be able to do this today, not even think it. So he actually got his gardener's son, a young boy, and he took scrapings from the cowpox blisters and he inoculated, so he injected them into the young boy and monitored him. So the boy developed some minor symptoms, but overall was fine. A few weeks later, what he actually did was he exposed the kid twice to pus from an active smallpox lesion. So if you did this to any other person, that person would have gotten really sick with smallpox and probably would have died. But the boy didn't. He never got sick. He remained quite healthy. That's how the idea of vaccination actually started. So 1796. So it's been an idea that's been around for quite some time. So which diseases do we vaccinate against? Schedules. I'm not going to go through that. Those are widely available to anyone who's interested from the national immunisation programs. I will say that these things, so I think that's current as of 1st of April this year, they change quite regularly because data is always coming in and we're looking at potential new diseases or new ways of dealing with things. So these things change. So people that have got kids that are a bit older would have noticed that some of this is different now than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And that's normal, that's how science works. Can't talk about vaccines and not talk about MMR. Okay, so because I get this question all the time. So what does it stand for? Measles, mumps, rubella, 3 extremely contagious viruses. Measles and mumps both spread via respiratory droplets. With measles you get this horrible red rash and a fever, quite deadly for little children. Mumps you get that characteristic swelling around your neck. Rubella is not as bad, I've got to say not as bad, but not as harmful to the adult unless it's a pregnant woman that we're talking. So rubella is quite an issue for pregnant women. So 1 in 5 pregnant women that get rubella will miscarry, and those that don't, 30% of children that are born will have defects. And so it's quite a big issue. We don't see much of rubella in Australia anymore, again, due to vaccination. But during the 50s and 60s, it was quite an issue in Australia, in Europe, in the States, everywhere. I'll skip this one, and I'll go to the main one. So autism and vaccines. So what started the rumours? I thought this poster summarised it really well, so I'm just going to go through it. In 1998, a doctor published a paper that claimed there was a link between autism and the MMR vaccine. And since then, this myth's been around. Lots of issues with the work that the guy actually published. So first of all, he took 12 kids. He took 12 kids that he handpicked for his experiments.
Generally in science, you don't handpick your subjects because that biases the outcome that you're going to get. But he handpicked the kids according to their symptoms. There was no scientific data, so it's not like he took bloods or he took any sort of, I guess, anything that you could measure. He called up parents and said, oh, well, do you remember when they were little, did they have these sorts of symptoms or did they have those sorts of symptoms, and how, what do you think, what did they feel like? And that's what his research was based about. The guy had major conflict of interest because he actually received £500,000 to do the work, and he got it from a lawyer who was trying to sue the company that made the vaccine, but he had no scientific proof. So the lawyer needed scientific data to then go and sue this company. So he paid the guy essentially £500,000 to fabricate results and support his claim. And the other thing is that this doctor was working on an alternative, safer MMR vaccine, which would have made him a billionaire. So lots of conflicts of interest. Since then, a lot of energy, time and money has been spent trying to disprove this myth. So a year later, someone had looked at a study of 500 children, couldn't find a link. Because if you do something in science and you publish it, anyone should be able to follow your methods and find the same results. If they can't, well then there's a problem with your work. Because it should be, you should be able to replicate those same results. 2001, 10,000 kids, no link. 2002, 500,000 kids from Denmark, no link. 500,000 kids from Finland, no link. 2005, someone collated all those studies that have been done, so we're talking 10 million children were looked at. No link between autism and the MMR vaccine. 2012, someone again collated all the work that has been done in the meantime, so we're talking 15 million children have been looked at and examined. No link between autism and vaccine. So I'm pretty sure we can say that claim has been unequivocally disproven. Okay? 12 kids, 15 million kids. So yeah. So when people talk about autism, and people that have labelled themselves as anti-vaxxers, they always fall back on this study. This study is so scientifically flawed that you can't use it to actually back your arguments because it makes no sense scientifically. HPV vaccine might be of relevance to some of the parents of school-aged children here. So it stands for human papillomavirus. It's a common contagious virus, affects both males and females, causes cervical cancer. Okay, so what normally happens is 99.7% of all cervical cancer is caused by HPV. But it's only a number of different HPV types that actually cause the cancer. It's just a small number of them. So normally if you get HPV, your body clears it up really quickly, you're good. Sometimes it can cause what we call these abnormalities in the cells that line the cervix, and that can lead to cancer. Since the introduction of the vaccination program, there has been a significant decrease in the number of, in the percentage of those abnormalities that we see in the cells of the cervix. So that's in 2007 is when the vaccine was introduced, and you can see, yes, thank you. You can see that the line's going down. So, and that's a good thing. No one wants cervical cancer. Prevention is always better than treatment.
So wasn't there a case where a 13-year-old girl was vaccinated against this disease and she died of cervical cancer shortly after the vaccine?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. As far as I'm concerned, this is not a live, and it's not I don't think this is an attenuated vaccine. To die so shortly from cervical cancer afterward. So cervical cancer, have a look, this takes 10 to 15 years to develop. So that to me, alarm bells. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular case, so I can't answer. Yep.
You didn't hear what she said, sorry.
She was asking, wasn't there a case of 13-year-old girl getting the vaccine and then dying soon after from cervical cancer? But it's not one that I'm familiar with. I'm sorry.
Speaking of conflict of interest,
yep.
My question is asking who and where the vaccines are coming from.
Yep.
So I've read of a case, I can't remember which country, I think it was somewhere in Africa, where they studied vials of vaccines
Yep.
with HPV, which were found to be contaminated with HPV antigen, which is known to create infertility in the recipient. So my question is whether you're aware of any of these kind of published cases about contaminants in vaccines?
In Australia, the answer would be no, because we're a developed country and that wouldn't be allowed here. To keep it short. In the developing world, there's all sorts of things that are happening, unfortunately.
So presumably there's controls that go under to check.
I would not be surprised. I would really not be surprised because the sort of things, and bad things do happen, and people do experiment, unfortunately, especially in the developing countries. But in Australia, we've got very stringent systems and very strict guidelines and rules, and I dare say no one would, I can't say no one's ever done it because I don't control, I haven't personally examined every vaccine, but I don't think it would be.
Import vaccines
So-
as well?
so we-
Don't just create them onshore?
Some we do, for example, the influenza vaccine that's made in CSL labs. One's in Melbourne, the other one's in Sydney. Some vaccines we do make here for ourselves. Other vaccines are imported. HPV, I don't know whether this one's imported or it's made here. I don't know, but I dare say in Australia that kind of stuff would not fly because we are where we are, and the control systems are in place. But to say that things don't happen outside in the other places where those sort of things can get unnoticed, I would not be surprised at all, which is really sad, really, really sad. But yeah, it does. It'd be really wrong if I said it didn't, because I'm pretty sure it does. I haven't seen it because I've never worked in places. No, but I haven't, been in those sorts of situations. But yeah, I would not be surprised at all, unfortunately. Yep.
We lived in Bangkok when my first child was born, and I think it was the 6-month vaccine at the time. There was a shortage.
Yep.
There was a shortage, and what they basically said to us that they had the older version of the vaccine that could be given to her, but it had different side effects. So, and it had similar results, but wasn't exactly the same. So, is it safe to say that those vaccines have been perfected, but they had flaws earlier, or that it's just changed?
It's just changed. It's just changed. So, with every medicine or every vaccine, there's side effects, right? So, what they're doing with some of the vaccinations is that they're actually, as a friend said, 3-in-1 or 4-in-1. So you're minimising the injection. A number of times your kids get vaccinated, but you're actually putting more into the vaccine. So then when you run out of the new stuff where you've got 4 or 5 different vaccines in one, you revert back to the old stuff, which is where you've got 3-in-1, and then you have to inject the kid 3 times to get 5 different shots. So to say that, I'd say they keep on getting better, but there is still room for improvement with each one, if that makes sense.
But it doesn't mean that those older vaccines...
They were bad. It doesn't mean that they were bad. Because, all likelihood is that we've probably got those vaccines and we're still around, so it doesn't make them bad. It's just because the technology changes, and I guess, there's just slight differences in the side effects, so they're trying to keep on improving them because there's always room for improvement. Yep.
With the combination
Yep.
vaccines, because now they come out with, I think, a 7-in-1.
Can we just, 1 second, so that everyone can hear this?
So 3-in-1 is, I think, the most they do in Australia at the moment, but I think there's a 7-in-1 that's coming into...
So there's a 4-in-1, a 5-in-1. So I've got 2 kids, both immunised for their age. I'm pretty sure there's a 4 or 5-in-1.
My query is, the more vaccines they put in the one vial, I'm assuming there's more preservatives.
No, not necessarily. There's more antigen.
That's what I was going to
So
question.
that's
So there are more antigens, but is it would the ratio be the same as per vial, or do they have to put more antigens on top?
No, it would have been the same. So if you say, let's just say, for the argument's sake, there was a mil of, I don't know, measles in a vial of an MMR vaccine, and now you've got 3 more things, you'd still put the same amount. You might just start, so the actual volume might be smaller, but you'd concentrate it more, so then it's the same amount. You would still be getting the same amount within yourselves. And to come to this question of multiple vaccinations, people often ask, you're putting 6 or 5 things in the body at the same time, is that an issue? Well, while you're sitting here, your immune system's constantly bombarded. You're breathing in air, there's all sorts of things that are coming into your body, you've just eaten. These are all antigens, your body's constantly being bombarded, so having 4 or 5 injected into you at the one time is really not that big of an issue for your immune system from that perspective. So this one's of relevance, especially when with those of us that've got parents that are either getting a bit older or approaching that stage. So most of us here have had chickenpox. It was the thing that we, if someone had chickenpox in your neighbourhood, you went to see them so you'd get it too, and then that way you'd be immune. But it's essentially, as you get old, as I said, your immune system weakens, right? And so your body's just unable to deal with these sorts of things anymore. And so once you've had chickenpox, it remains in your body forever, for life. It's always there. And so when you get old and your immune system, is not that great anymore, it reactivates and it causes shingles. Extremely painful. It affects mostly the elderly, and it causes this red rash, but it can cause pain and tingling for up to 12 months. And from what I've heard, it is extremely painful for for that group. So there is a vaccine available, and it's recommended for people over the age of 60. So something to think about or discuss with your loved ones. So side effects, because I didn't want this to just be about vaccines are great, vaccinate your kids, because at the end of the day we've all got to make a decision that's best for our families. Everything has a side effect. Every medication that you take has a side effect, so you need to be fully informed what those are. So I'm just going to grab a few examples here. So diphtheria, that's the disease. So it's bacteria spread through respiratory droplets, can cause severe throat and breathing difficulties. Disease itself, 1 in 7 can die from this. And it's because the bacteria releases a toxin, paralyses your nerves, causes your heart to stop. The vaccine itself, side effects, 1 in 10 has swelling, redness and pain, sometimes fever. Sometimes a booster dose or second dose is associated with extensive limb swelling, but that usually goes away within a couple of days on its own. Serious adverse events are very rare. That means more than 1 in 100,000. Okay, so they're very rare. Measles. I've spoken about this earlier, and this is what's happening in Samoa at the moment. Highly infectious, causes fever, cough, rash in kids. 1 in 15 that develops this gets pneumonia. That can be a really big problem for small children. And then 1 in 1,000 develops brain inflammation. The stats say it all. And then in terms of the vaccine, 1 in 10 has swelling, redness and pain at this injection site. 1 in 20 develops a rash, which is not infectious, and sometimes some people get this low platelet count, which can cause bruising or bleeding after the first dose. That's at about a 1 in 20 to 1 in 30,000. That resolves with time. Serious adverse events, again, very rare. Pertussis or whooping cough. So bacteria spread by respiratory droplets. It causes what they call the 100-day cough. The babies cough a lot, and it's a particular issue for babies, young babies, because they cough so much that they can't actually catch a breath, and then they die. So 1 in 120 babies that get this will die from pneumonia. So in Australia now we vaccinate pregnant women in that 3rd trimester against DTP, so tetanus, diphtheria and pertussis. So the pregnant woman starts to make antibodies. Those antibodies are then passed on to the unborn child, so it has some sort of protection until it gets the first vaccine. Again, side effect, 1 in 10 swelling, redness, pain. Booster sometimes associated with that extensive limb swelling, but it can resolve completely within a few days. Serious adverse events, very rare. Rotavirus, spread by fecal oral route, and So typical for kids. So kids are still learning about hygiene, good hygiene practices. This is a relatively new vaccine, so in the last 10 years or so introduced. So it causes diarrhea, and it can be a problem for babies, especially if it's severe diarrhea. Children under the age of 5, before this vaccine was introduced, so 10,000 hospitalised, 150 GP visits, and 22 needed emergency healthcare. So, and those are the side effects of the vaccine. So I'm just going to skip to a few slides because I think we're running out of time. So it was actually really hard to find the position of the Serbian Orthodox Church on the topic of vaccination. I tried both in English and Serbian, there was nothing very clear cut. Tried the Greek Orthodox Church in English, couldn't find anything, but luckily the Russians have delivered. So this is the view of the Russian Orthodox Church on vaccinations. So this was a brochure for parents that was called Vaccination for Children, that was published on advice of the Russian Church in 2010. And it's very much for vaccinating children, as you can read yourselves.
Recommended.
Sorry?
Recommended.
Yes, recommended. And so for the, apologise to the non-Serbian speakers here, but you can find stuff in Serbian about the general position, but nothing that's really as clear-cut as what the Russians have come out. So yes, children should be vaccinated. This is a really interesting web portal that I find quite useful. They've got actually a lot of articles on vaccination, but 4 or 5 interviews with immunologists, doctors, priests, all from an Serbian Orthodox perspective on the subject. So if you're ever interested, I highly recommend this website. Not just for that, but other things as well. So last little bit, and this is hopefully where the discussion can take off, how are vaccines made? So typically, bacteria can just grow on their own, and you grow them in these really big flasks, because we're talking about commercial quantities. Viruses, though, they can't grow on their own. So when you get sick from a virus, the virus actually has to infect your own cells in order to replicate and to grow, okay? So when we grow viral vaccines, measles, we grow them in chick embryos, influenza, we grow it in chicken eggs. Rubella, however, we grow on a human cell line. And so this human cell line was actually derived from an aborted embryo back in 1962. So the embryo was never meant to be used for vaccine production. Whether the woman consented for the embryo to be used for scientific research is an unknown thing. I couldn't find that anywhere, but I know it wasn't meant to be used for vaccine production. So why was it? So rubella is, remember the thing that we said pregnant women can get and can cause miscarriage and then birth defects in the child. Well, there was a lot of rubella happening in the States and in Europe, 40s, 50s and 60s, and they just could not find a way to grow this virus to make a vaccine. Everything they tried failed. And so someone came with this idea that maybe potentially they can use the human cell line or the embryo. So what they did is they took that original tissue. So embryonic stem cells have got potential to become anything and everything if you guide them in the right direction. So what they did is they put these cells in a certain environment and made them go into a certain path, okay, into a particular type of cell. And then they used that to grow the virus, and it grew really well. So all the rubella vaccines that have ever been available have been grown on this cell line, okay? And it's not the only vaccine. So this is a list of vaccines that are used today using human cell lines. So Hep A, rubella, varicella is your chickenpox, zoster is your shingles. The last 2 are not typically used in Australia, so it wouldn't be much of an issue. Are there alternatives? Well, in Australia, no. Researchers in Japan have actually come out with a Hep A vaccine and a chickenpox vaccine that they've managed to grow on monkey cells instead of human cell lines. That's not available in Australia yet, and then if it will be, it remains to be seen. Yep.
You say human cell line.
Yep.
What does that mean?
All right. So what you do is, as I've said, viruses can't grow on their own, right? So think of a cell line as a vessel, something that supports that virus. So that virus infects it, is able to grow, replicate, keeps on growing and replicating using that material, that environment, that vessel, like So that's probably the best explanation that I can give you.
What do they use? As what is a human cell line? What is it?
So it's taken from an embryo. So you take an embryo. So this is the embryo that was donated or aborted in 1962.
So an aborted fetus. Embryo
Yes. Yes.
used in-
Yes.
And
Yes.
the Orthodox Church agrees with that.
Next slide. But yeah. So essentially, all right. So again, people have asked both the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. Again, the Serbian Orthodox Church has not come up with a clear view on this. I couldn't find anything from the Greeks. Again, the Russians luckily delivered. And so what they've said is committing, obviously, aborting that embryo was a sin. That was committed. On the other hand, rubella vaccine has saved thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives of unborn children. So it's saved lives. The vaccine itself does not contain fetal DNA or embryonic DNA, so there's none of that in the vaccine that you get. And the original sin that was created, so please, Father, help me here with this one, because this is, as they say, above my pay grade, is not such that it's not a recurring type. So it's not as if every time those cells multiply and virus is produced, it is not as if we are recommitting that sin. That was my understanding and my interpretation of what the church said. So the church said, yes, use it. Because if you stop using it, and they've actually got a problem in Russia now, because I think it was almost close to 50% of 2-year-olds are not vaccinated against this. So it might not be an issue for them now, but later down the track when those kids come to an age of reproductive age, it will be an issue if they don't get vaccinated. So they've said, yes, it is acceptable because it saves lives. However, we should lobby the pharmaceutical industry to make ethical and more acceptable vaccines. So that's a very short summary of what they've said. Yep.
So you mentioned that none of the DNA remains in the vaccine because I've read that the distilled cell line, I believe.
There was a paper. No, there was a paper recently, and it caused quite a lot of commotion, and that's again been disproven. The technique, so the actual paper never showed there were levels of DNA. They just made a claim because they said they tested it in a way that's never been validated and has actually been proven wrong by other groups. And the way that this, I think we're talking about the same paper where they said it triggers certain pathways in the body with the fetal DNA remnants in some of the vaccines. They worked on mice, so quite different, but the way that they supposedly measured, is not an acceptable way of measuring. It hasn't been proven to be actually correct.
Okay. What about with the non-human cell lines?
Yep.
Something about retroviruses getting into vaccines, such as with some of the animal grown, because I think there are also vaccines grown in bovine DNA.
Yep.
So that's cow DNA.
Yep.
So part of, presumably, are they distilling it to zero cow DNA?
I'd say as close to zero as possible.
But potentially some percentage.
There's always potentially something in there, but I dare say with the advent, with the way technology is, they're pretty close to zero as you can scientifically get.
So what does the virus live in if they've now distilled the cell that it was growing into zero?
Well, in nothing. You don't need it to grow in anymore because you've got the virus. That's what you're going to vaccinate against. You don't need the cell line anymore. That's just there to grow the virus, so then I can inject you with it. Once I've grown enough of it, that stuff just stays behind. I just use the virus, and you can purify it out. You can.
One more specific question with regard to retroviruses. Sorry to agree with you, but have you heard of Judy Mikovits?
No.
She's got to do with the foundational studies of HIV.
Okay.
So HIV is known as a monkey virus. It started in monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Her theory, along with a few other well-revered scientists, has got to do with the potential of HIV getting into the human DNA or human genome through vaccines. If you've never heard of Judy, I suppose the questions...
Look, potential is endless. it's just, we're our own limit at the moment. We really are, and the technology that we've got. So you could potentially do anything, the good and bad. It's up to us where we take it and what technology we enable. But yes, as with everything, as with every development in technology, you can do good, you can do bad. So it's really, if that's the angle of your question, because I'm not really familiar with the word, so I can't.
I should say Dr. Judy,
Yes,
she's well revered in HIV studies, and basically the idea of hers and other studies is that for a monkey-borne virus to cross into the human body, human genome, there had to be some kind of carrier. So I'd be interested to hear.
I wouldn't really know. I wouldn't really know on this topic. But yeah, I've always been more on influenza vaccines being my work that I.
So influenza in Australia doesn't carry mercury anymore?
Nothing since 2000 on the Australian National Immunisation Schedule. Nothing. And I'm pretty sure. No, MMR never did, because that's the one you get quite often.
And is it thimerosal, which is the carrier which allows viruses and adjuvants to cross the blood-brain barrier?
I don't think anyone would agree that that's their point.
But can do.
I don't know about thimerosal, but you wouldn't generally give stuff that can cross the blood-brain barrier.
No, the idea is certain things can't cross the blood-brain barrier, right? But once attached to something such as, I think, thimerosal, can do.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know that. I haven't come across that in the reading that I've been doing.
Okay, someone else check.
Sorry. Anyone else?
Any other questions?
Embryo survived for so many years.
So there are ways that you can not immortalise the cell, but almost immortalise it so you can keep it replicating. Because it's not an embryo anymore.
How often does it happen?
So it's not an embryo anymore. So for all those vaccines, that list of vaccines, 2 embryos, ever. All those vaccines since then have only ever been produced on 2 aborted embryos.
But when the vaccine was produced?
Yes.
What year?
So 1962, that embryo was aborted, and then it was used. I think the vaccine started sometime in the late 60s. So it took a while. It took a while.
So that embryo was preserved somewhere by somebody with some intention, or is it the practice with every aborted embryo?
It really depends. From my understanding, you can give consent to donate your embryo to scientific researchers, at least these days. Whether that was consent was an issue in the 60s, I'm not really sure. But otherwise, I think that would be
any other human cell, like adult?
No, because the virus needs to replicate a certain number of times in order for you to actually generate enough. And our grown cells, let's call them that, they don't replicate long enough, they're not alive long enough for that virus to allow the virus to replicate, which is why you need the starting embryonic material.
As an immunologist and parent, how do you protect or safeguard your kids, and maybe a typical household that don't have as much knowledge as you do against other kids that might not be vaccinated?
I vaccinate my kids. I've got a 9-month-old and an almost 4-year-old. They're both vaccinated up, according to the schedule. I think that's my way of giving them the best possible chance to remain healthy.
So kids they come in contact with that aren't vaccinated, are there any dangers?
So I would be worried if there was a measles outbreak, because my 9-month-old hasn't received the MMR vaccine yet, and so she's susceptible. My almost 4-year-old's had 2 shots for that, so you need 3 shots to receive full protection, so she's almost fully protected. So I'd be wary about sending them out to where there are infected, or during an outbreak. I'd be really worried about that. That would be an issue that would bother me.
Yeah.
Because being unvaccinated, it's actually more of an issue for the child who isn't vaccinated than for the children around it who are. It's just when your child can't get a certain vaccine up until a certain age, because those are just, that's best practice, that becomes an issue for them, but otherwise it's not really. Yeah, so that's what I do, I vaccinate my kids. I did have a discussion with my husband about the Gardasil vaccine, and I said to him, I'm not going to vaccinate the girls with that, and he said, why not? It's a transmissible disease, I'm going to have all good conversations with my kids, and I'm going to teach them about their reproductive health. And he said, well, okay, let's say, hypothetical, you do that, and we have some control over what they do in life. Hopefully we guide them the right way, and they get married, but let's say the husband has an affair, and he picks up HPV, and your daughter then subsequently gets cervical cancer. And I thought, oh geez, it's a bit early to think about these sorts of things, but it just shows you how little you can control, and so the things that you can, I'm still not 100% convinced on it, so it might take some time, but it's just, as a parent you have to weigh the benefits versus the risks, and at the end it's up to all of us individually to make that decision best for our kids.
HPV is not like genetically susceptible,
No.
you have to catch it.
No, it's a sexually transmitted virus, essentially.
So, okay.
Yep. That's a lot.
Isn't the same for hepatitis B though?
Sorry?
Hepatitis B, isn't that also sexually transmitted?
Yes, generally, but that's, but you can also get it through other means, so
Intravenous.
drug use or tattoos or.
But presumably a one-day
Presumably.
isn't gonna.
No, but you never. This is that same discussion. What waits for them later on, and will they know whether they're protected or not later on in life? Like it's just, but yeah, good point. It's do they really live? And where do you live? And where are you surrounding live? And what type of life do you live? There's all sorts of things. So might not be relevant for you, but for someone else.
Well, it's worthy to note that Hep B is the one and only optional on the schedule to be eligible for subsidies.
My mic is working. Did you? No, go, you go.
That's right. I'm loud enough. If we take the concept of memory cells, and if we then take vaccination and to simplify it, and say that it jumpstarts your immune system to prep you for whatever disease you may have. Is it then fair to conclude, and maybe it's simplifying it, but to say that really what you're solving for with immunization is the time difference? I.e., if my memory cells would naturally take 4 weeks to build up, and therefore a particular virus or a particular infection can peaks at 1 week, that then puts me at significant risk. But eventually my body's going to get to a state where it's producing enough.
Not necessarily. You might be dead before then.
No, absolutely. So hence, is immunization actually solving for that time difference, or is
it is
in a very simplistic way?
Yes, it is. Yes, because it is exactly jump-starting your immune response. So it's allowing you a quicker way to start producing those antibodies. So yes.
And then on that, and then on that, would it be fair to say if we looked at all the critical diseases that we're solving for, and if we look at sort of the time element of those diseases, i.e. from the point of contraction to the point of when they actually become most active, is it fair to say that all of them require immunization? I.e. do they all peak at that one period? Are we not going to have enough time? And this just comes from the fact that I also think that the immune system, it's not a thought process, but I think we can all agree that the immune system is an unbelievably complex and amazing organism. And you injecting yourself with a foreign body has its own element of risk. So you only want to do it where risk outweighs or the benefit outweighs the risk itself. So then have we genuinely studied, and maybe yes, maybe no, that time difference? Are we really solving for the most critical viruses today, and simply are we certain that our immune system is not going to have the time frame to build up the antibodies?
I think we are, because you're asking two questions in one. So I think we are, because mine's gone blank, sorry, baby bones. I guess because The urine immune system. Can we go again with your question so that I can? Sorry.
No, that's fine. We can.
No.
No, it's okay. So basically, what I'm saying, if we take that concept of memory cells,
Yes.
it takes a certain amount of time, right,
Mhm.
for the body to start building
Yep.
antibodies. We're going to immunize ourselves
Yep.
because we give our immune system a jump start. We
Yep.
prep it,
Yep.
i.e. for a virus that actually might come and cause significant damage or
Yes.
eventually.
Yep.
If we then take that simplification
Yep.
and then state that, fine, what we're doing is we're jump starting our immune
Yep.
system because we're worried about the time difference.
Mm-hmm.
Do we then look at each element, each virus?
It's hard because how do you then do that? That's very time consuming. Okay. When you get people to come in for a vaccination, they just want to get it over and done with. So, and importantly, kids under the age of 4 or under the age of 5 are considered, their immune systems are still developing. So you need that constant problem in order to get that immune response up, because you never know. You know, how do you know when you're going to get exposed to something? Would it be in 2 months, 2 years, 20 years? So instead of, so you're kind of taking the guessing game out of it by just saying, well, this is when it's done at this point, at that point, and then that's all level. I think it's the best approach because it ensures everyone's covered in the best possible manner. But also, I guess it's hard because we live in a world where there's a lot of trouble. You don't know who you're sitting next to in public transport or at a cafe or restaurant where they've been, what they might have picked up and what you're going to take home. Like it's just, and so how do you know? And that's why we're vaccinating against more and more things because we're exposing ourselves to more and more things. And at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to vaccinate because you're actually using your own immune system than it is to treat. Because when you're treating something, you're actually giving yourself drugs. That's not natural. Immunisation, that's using your own system by giving yourself a small amount of either dead bacteria or a virus that's been altered, so you can't. So it's not. To me, immunisation is more natural than treatment, because treatment is drugs. This is bacteria that I might have picked up anyway. You know what? This is stuff that exists in the world. So, to me that's a more natural way, and it's just a controlled way. We control the mechanisms rather than just say, hey, go and good luck. May God be with you. You control the environment. Does that?
It does.
Sorry, it took me a while to get there.
Same question, but rephrased.
Yeah.
If body started using antibodies 4 weeks after exposed, and certain antigens need 2 weeks to peak, is that with every?
Every disease is going to be different. The most aggressive, so the most nasty ones,
2 weeks.
They even sometimes a week is enough. So because from their point of view, the quicker you cause disease and the quicker you run down the system, the stronger the virus is or the stronger the bacteria. So it's in their interest. But then they don't want to do it too quickly so that you die off before they can infect someone else. Like from a virus point of view.
Are there any antigens that need more than 4 weeks to go?
Some things might take a while. So HPV, that takes a long time for your body to start generating immune response and causing issues. So that takes a long time.
We don't need vaccine for that because the body will be able to.
Sometimes, and sometimes the body won't be able to. Who knows? Do you want to take the risk, or do you don't? No one knows. If I knew that my body would react in a certain way, then I wouldn't take vaccines. But I don't know. No one can tell me that. We're not that advanced yet. So I take the vaccine just to make sure. Because for me, the risks outweigh, the benefits outweigh the risks at the end of the day. Because no one really knows.
Okay, we are really running out of time. Pinching time for lunch, and our kids are unattended for the last 20 minutes. So I'll allow for one more question, and then we'll have to go and have some lunch and find our kids as well. The back.
It's all right.
I think it's not just flying time, right? Because it's actually, when you show the picture of the smallpox, not just about when it peaks and how long it takes to get over it. You're actually, so that's right, you're not finding the cause.
It is buying time because your body's able to start dealing with that earlier, and therefore the consequences of that aren't as severe as they would have normally been.
So even though it's not a cure,
no,
in one way or another, you are helping actually fight against it at the best possible strength.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why you get those repeated vaccines to make sure your immune response is right up there. It's the best that it can be, and so that it can just quickly act when something does come around. That's why sometimes, and some vaccines you need more shots than others, depending, and certain people react to vaccines differently. So, and there are side effects, and sometimes they are quite horrific. They do exist, but it's at a rate of about 1 in a million. But it's when it's your child, and it's that 1 in a million. Well, that sucks. That's horrible. So I acknowledge that as a parent and as a person. But again, benefits versus risks, and I think as parents it's something we do all the time. So.
Thank you, Ana. That was really an eye-opener. It was a very informative lecture. It was a great conversation as well. I'm glad to see that we have more than one expert in the room, and I'm really looking forward to our future discussions on this topic, and I'm glad that we are making history here because the Serbian Church does not have a clear answer, and this is maybe one of the bigger steps taken in the last 2 decades to actually provide an answer on this issue and similar issues. We will have lunch now, and after lunch there'll be another session with Draž and Simon presenting on another crucial topic to do with the Orthodox family and life of an Orthodox family in the 21st century Australia or 21st century Western world. That includes the Balkans as well. So, okay, now we'll break for lunch. Once again, please, a round of applause for Ana and for Our last session for today is titled From the Dark Side to God's Side, and it will be presented by 2 very dear and very important friends of this church and of our community. I'll introduce them briefly, and then I'm sure you will be more than interested to hear their story and to get something out of it. Doesn't matter if you have small children or adult children, this is something that will definitely stay with you throughout your life. So, first of all, let me introduce Draž and Simon. Draž Brkljac is a president of our parish here, and many of you know him personally, but maybe you don't know that he has accomplished such great achievements both in his field of expertise as a police officer, but also beyond his traditional role. He's not solely defined by his role of New South Wales police officer deployed at PCYC Parramatta in the Youth and Crime Prevention Command for the past 7 years. His work and contribution to the Parramatta community extends far beyond this. He's an individual who has not only proven to be an exceptional police officer, but also an outstanding community leader, friend, confidant, and mentor. In his role as a youth case manager, Draž works with young offenders and youth at risk across the Parramatta LGA to enhance their self-respect, reduce recidivism, and enable positive participation in the community. The highly commended Stand Tall, Fit for Work and Fit for Change programs, which Draž has delivered, are prime examples of the effort in which he extends his personal investment far beyond anything the role would require. Through his extensive network within schools, community groups, employers and justice organizations, Draž has been able to identify and engage with young people whom are least likely to make a successful transition to adulthood and provide tenable pathways to employment as well as meaningful social participation for over 200 young people. Pivotal in his ability to make an impact on at-risk youth is the mentoring relationship he offers to young people who may lack a significant authority figure in their lives. Through this approach, he provides a positive opportunity for young people to make their own informed choices concerning matters of health, education, family and community. In doing so, the impact Draž makes extends far beyond just the disadvantaged young people he's working with, but has a multiplying effect throughout the family, legal and economic life of our society. His leadership and passion for his community and PCYC is unwavered, and on a weekly basis Draž can be found at PCYC Parramatta, welcoming members, engaging with youth, young people, families and promoting the PCYC mission and values. He operates with a high level of energy and integrity as he strives for excellence, inspiring staff, volunteers and members to continue to improve and be better citizens. His efforts have helped to make PCYC Parramatta an integral institution in enhancing the lives of young people in a diverse community. He was recently, his role continues beyond that of police youth case manager. His aspirations for a healthy and cohesive community are demonstrated by his appointment in 2018 as a community police ambassador by the Australian Chinese Community Association New South Wales, as well as the voluntary role he undertakes as president of St. Nicholas Serbian Orthodox Church Blacktown, president of the PCYC Blacktown Committee and many others. In these other roles, Draž has been instrumental in assisting to make inroads into the community it is part of and engagement of youth into educational, cultural and sporting activities. This includes securing support and sponsorship for club events, along with advocating for partnerships and community collaboration. Draž has received many accolades over the years, but it is the positive interaction and role modeling that he has the greatest impact on young people through his innovative crime prevention and case management of young offenders and youth at risk. In recent years, he has been recognized for his outstanding service to the community through many awards, and I will list only a few. In 2014, Parramatta City Council Australia Day Highly Commended Citizen of the Year Award. In 2014, Lord Mayor of Parramatta City Council Commendation for Commitment and Service to City of Parramatta and the broader community. In 2017, Winner Police Officer of the Year, PCYC Youth and Crime Prevention Command Annual Awards. In 2018, winner Stand Tall Police Program of the Year. In 2018, finalist of New South Wales Police Officer of the Year, Rotary Awards. In 2018 as well, recipient of the St. Peter of Cetinje Medal, one of the highest ecclesiastical medals issued by the Holy Synod of the Serbian Orthodox Church to a civilian for love, compassion, dedication towards the Serbian Orthodox Church. Very proud to say that in 2019, Draž has been declared Blacktown Citizen of the Year in the Blacktown Council, and as well a Parramatta Westfield Community Hero. I'm more than proud to say that Draž is not only a leader of this parish and the president of our board, but also a very dear friend, not only my own friend, but of all of us here. And he's a great support for all of us. With him here is also his friend Simon Khoury. Let me just say that many times we hear, I feel like my job is not changing the world and not allowing me to live my Christian mission. It's not about the job, but how we go about our job and treat others that allows us to live our Christian values. This is the foundation of Simon Khoury, a man whose life story is inspirational, a man who gives so much to many and never asks anything in return, a man who organized one of the biggest prayer gatherings for the persecuted Christians in the Middle East, a founding member of Brothers United in Christ, a man who never stops helping St. Nicholas Serbian Orthodox Church and other Orthodox churches in Sydney. Simon works close with Draž Brkljac in helping and mentoring disadvantaged youth and adults. A few days ago, when I was in one of the schools where I teach SRE scripture classes, I've asked the staff there if I could give out pamphlets for this event today. And when I gave out the pamphlet, there was you can't see it here, but it was that poster that you can see outside. It was on the screen earlier, where there's photos of the presenters of today. And on one of those photos, you could see Draž and Simon. And the lady, when I handed this leaflet to her, she was just stunned, and I was waiting there for like 2 minutes for her to answer me, and after about long 120 seconds, she said, I know this person, Simon. And you'll hear throughout this presentation that, you know, this was not the first brotherhood that Simon was a part of. He lived, well, the topic is from dark side to God's side. He wasn't always on God's side. So, and it will be very interesting to hear how he and Draj, who was a police officer, how did they cross paths, and how did they meet each other, and how did they develop this relationship that's saving lives these days. So please welcome Draj and Simon.
Thank you, Father. Before I start, I would like to also acknowledge Father Nemanja. Like you said, we've known each other a very long time before he became a priest, and a dear friend, spiritual father, but the work he does here at our church and around in the Serbian community, not just the Serbian community, but the wider Australian community is fantastic. And I'd just like to say, Father, thank you for bringing life to Blacktown. Yeah, you want to get that? You want to get that one? Dear Reverend Fathers, brothers and sisters in Christ, the title of our talk is From the Dark Side to God's Side, and Simon and I discussed about the title because Father Nemanja likes Star Wars. And I thought, it would be appropriate just to have that type of title. But before I start, I'd like to also say that when Father Nenad was talking, I saw Vedran and his beautiful wife hugging each other, and I thought it was really, really, really cute when Father Nenad was talking about the movies that show love, and I saw Vedran's wife just grab Vedran and hug him and look at each other in the eye with his love and passion. I thought it was really cute, so I just wanted to mention love is in the air. I thought it was fantastic. But yeah. So, I'm sorry Vedran, I put you on the spot, but I just had to say it. I thought it was really, really cute. I just want to, before I start, I just want to read some stats. Most probably a lot of you people regarding youth crime here in New South Wales. So in 2016 and 2017, 1,500 young people were being supervised either in a community or in a youth detention centre. So it's an alarming stat. 48% of the children and young people in custody in New South Wales are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people are 20 times more likely to be detained than non-Indigenous children and young people in New South Wales. 87% of young people in New South Wales prisons have a mental health condition, including alcohol or drug-related problems. That's 87%. That's an alarming stat. 1,344 is the daily cost of detaining one child or young person in New South Wales, and it's $490,560 is the cost of detaining one child or young person in New South Wales for 1 year. So it's nearly $500,000 that we're paying our tax money. So the work that I do, and Simon, both the work that we do in the community, is working. Unfortunately, people don't get to listen or to see what we do, especially the work that Simon does with my programs. 97% of the children that I work with, and I spoke to Father Nenad about it, 97% of the children I work with, and I do ask them, do you believe in God? And they say no. But Father Nenad did make a valid point. I believe they believe in something, but what were they taught, in which God or what religion? They do believe in something. So they have the perception of some type of religious belief, but what they see in the media. So that's alarming as well. The massive impact that I see, an important impact, are from the parents. If we have loving parents with the children, they will go on the right path. I thank God, and Father Miodrag was our parish priest at when I lived at Bonnery. I knew my late father and my mother. My mother's still alive, but was it hard living in a Serbian household? Yeah, it was. It wasn't easy. Father Miodrag knew my late father really well. God bless his soul. It was difficult. But what kept our family going was our faith. Being a police officer, I tried to lead by example, not just here in our community, but in the wider Australian community, because faith is very important. We were altar boys when we were young, in DY. But it was my mother that made us, when we were young, we didn't want to go to church like us. So no, I don't want to go. But there was no no. You couldn't say no in our family. You had to go. But I thank my mum for being persistent in taking us to church and instilling that flame in all three. My older brother, who's a doctor, and my twin brother, who's overseas. But instilling that flame. But also, Father Miodrag was here. He'd come over and bless our house every year. And we would ask questions, he would answer them. You know? So thank you, Father. Before I move on, I just want to show you a quick video of the work that Simon and I have been doing the last couple of years, and then we'll continue on.
Before I used to sleep in, but now I wake up early. My friend Renui, he doesn't really wake up, so I told him to sleep over my house, and I tried to get him up to take him here early enough, so he tries to get into a routine.
The program is Fit for Change. It's a police program where we engage with students from Arthur Phillip High School. It's a mentoring, positive engagement program. Students from Arthur Phillip High School came and participated in a fitness program which ran on Wednesdays and Fridays. And during that time, on a Wednesday, they would have a guest speaker from one of our police commands to talk about different topics that are affecting youth of today.
Now I'm waking up at like 5 o'clock in the morning every Wednesday and Friday to come to the program. And I feel a lot brighter, like more awake than when I usually am, like tired and all that stuff, falling asleep at school. I used to like not really do my work. I used to sit there and just play games, but now I do my work. I love English because I like writing heaps. I have stopped being as naughty as I was in class, and I'm not scared to put my hand up in class.
I would say more than half the class now are speaking up and actually coming forward and asking for help. So I think just through seeing his interactions with the other students, he's definitely making a larger impact, on the whole class.
The focus is much more positive now. They're talking about how they can do the right thing, how do I do this better, service, how can I improve. The students are actually seeing that the police are people and the mentors that they work with are real people. And again, that filters over into school. They see teachers as real people and they start to get that idea of, when I do something, it doesn't just affect me, it affects the people around me, and whether that be the police or my teachers or my parents, what I do has an impact.
These youth had dreams, they had big dreams. They want to become superstars in soccer, or they want to become an actor, or they want to become a mechanic. And it's my role as a police officer to assist them, to give them goals, to give them tools, and assist them to make their dreams a reality. At the end, when I see one of these youth come up to me with a smile on their face and say, thank you, Draz, for this opportunity. I believe I've done a good job. So as Father Museum, I've been a police officer for 20 years. I was in forensics for 10 years, so I travelled all around New South Wales and Australia for work, whether there was a major crime, Victorian bushfires and so forth. Being a youth case manager, working with disengaged youth is more demanding than I expected when I was in forensics, because obviously I'm dealing with someone that's there and with the parents. So how does Simon get involved in this? Well, Simon and I met 2014. Obviously everyone knew that the issues that's happening in the Middle East, persecuted Christians, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine that said there's going to be a gathering of Christians to support our brothers and sisters in the Middle East. There's a funny story. We went to the church and Simon's brother was there, and he welcomed me in front of the church, but Phil he's got tattoos all over his neck, face, head, yeah. And I'm saying to myself, who is this guy welcoming me into the church? I go, I'm already judging him from walking into the church. So I'm making judgment. And that, I was thinking to myself, well, something's not right here. So I walk in, we listen, Simon spoke, and it was, 2,500 people at the gathering. So afterwards, I walked up to his brother and said, look, I just have to apologise. Never met me before. He goes, why? Well, you welcomed me into the church. He goes, yeah, well, I can't remember you, but okay, I did. I said, I judged you before I walked into the church, I do apologise. And he started laughing. He goes, oh, I get that all the time. So Simon and I sat down that night, just briefly. I said, Simon, can we just have a chat? I think what you're doing is fantastic. This is what I do. I think you'd be great for telling your story, because as I say to the kids that I work with, everyone's got a story to tell. Doesn't matter because I've got my uniform on, doesn't mean I don't have a story. I said, Simon, let's get together. So we caught up a couple of weeks after that. He came to my office and we sat down, had a chat, told him his story. I thought it was fantastic. One of the first programs I ran, it's called Project Buya. I asked Simon to take one of the kids on board as an apprentice plumber. Simon has a successful plumbing business, and he said, yep, no problems. But that young man that was part of Simon's team, we had some really, really tough and difficult discussions and tough times with him. The young man who you saw in that video, yeah, good kid, all kids are good. Still having some difficulties with a lot of kids that I work with. Unfortunately, there are kids in our community, Serbian community, that are dealing with drugs, mental health issues, and I applaud Father Nenad once again. We have to discuss this. It has to be an open topic so we can find out how we can help one another, even with the blessing of the priests. I get phone calls all the time, so I said to Simon, look, we need to get out there and discuss our experiences that we had with families and the youth, so people get a better understanding, so if we can help in other areas and maybe other people can come on board. I'll get Simon to say a few words, and after he's finished, I'll continue on. Brother.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'd just like to read a small poem, which I always read just to start off with my talk. It's from a famous Lebanese poet called Khalil Gibran on May 26, 1916. Khalil Gibran wrote a letter to Mary Haskell that reads, "The famine in Mount Lebanon has been planned and instigated by the Turkish government. Already 80,000 people have succumbed to starvation and thousands are dying every single day." The letter wrote the following poem. Dead are my people. Written in exile during the famine in Lebanon in World War I. My people are dead on the cross. They died while their hands are stretched towards the east and while they're stretched towards the west. While the remnants of their eyes stared blackness infirm. They died silently for humanity. They died silently for humanity had closed their eyes to their cries. They died because they placed their trust in humanity. They died because they did not oppress the oppressor. They died because they were crushed flowers and not the crushing feet. They died because they were peacemakers. They perished from hunger in a land rich with milk and honey. They died because the monsters of hell arose and destroyed, that their fields grew and devoured their last provisions. They died because the vipers and sons of vipers spat out venom and poison into their space where the holy cedars and the roses and the jasmine and the holy jasmine fragrance went through the air. I'll read this particular poem because it was through the persecution in the Middle East that truly brought me back to my faith. Again, hi everyone, thank you for having me today. My name's Simoun Khoury. I grew up around this area. And just to clarify, Draz didn't arrest me, so that's not how we met. He actually did meet through church, just want to clarify that. It's people typically think that he did arrest me, he didn't. It's all good. So guys, I'm here. I'm one of 4 boys who are very well known in the area and the community. Not for the best reasons, not for the best, not for being church guys, let me put it that way. I didn't have any faith in the early days of my life. I attended a Catholic school. I am Maronite, so because I'm not Serbian, I don't understand when you speak Serbian, so just to put that out there, because people do speak to me in Serbian, and I'm not Serbian. So, yeah, my parents did their very best to try and help me, and not only me, but you know, through the limited means that my parents did have, they tried to help us in the early stages. But you know, growing up, 4 boys, we did what we did. You know, I grew up wanting to be the class clown at school. I wanted to be the popular person. I wanted to be the kid that everyone looked up to, everyone thought was funny, and all the stuff, you know, being a teenager, you thought was the right thing to do. Growing up as an adult, I wanted to be like some of the mates, some of the guys that I called my brothers. I wanted money. I wanted the girls. You know, we used to take drugs. We were in gangs. I wanted motorbikes, cars, all the fancy stuff, all the irrelevant stuff that I believe now. It's all the stuff that we'd see on TV, all the stuff that's glorified on TV. You know, you see series like The Underbelly, shows like that glorify, you know, illegal stuff, bad stuff, stuff that we shouldn't be doing. They never ever glorify, on the other hand, what happens to the people, that, you know, the families and the flow and effect from all that. This lifestyle that I talk about only gauges on how much money you have and how much money you can make for the other people. You just become an asset within that lifestyle. There's no true fellowship and no brotherhood. Like Draz and I have become so tight, you know, I know in an instance Draz would be there for me and I for him, and there's no monetary value in that. And that's where a true brotherhood comes from. Not the formed brotherhood that people talk about, or bikies, or gangs and stuff like that, because that is all monetary. That's all an ulterior motive behind all that, where when you come to church and you're with your church family, the church family truly wants the best for you. They don't want any monetary value from you. They don't want nothing from you other than to achieve the best you can. Some of the boys I used to call my brothers. Some of the boys I used to look up to. When I say boys, these guys I lived with. They lived in my house. They had keys to my house. They would come and go. I would come and go out of their houses. we were potentially, we called each other family, you know, but we weren't family. And why I talk about this so freely nowadays is because so many kids and so many youth that we see, and the youth that I see Draz work with especially, get caught up in this limelight. They get caught up with this life of thinking that's what they need to do to try and achieve a status, to try and achieve, you know, being known. And that's what I did growing up as a girl. I needed that status. I thought that's what I needed. I thought I needed to be one of those people. But, you know, through that lifestyle, there was plenty of heartache for my family, plenty of heartache for friends of mine. I had friends of mine who died, friends of mine who'd been shot, friends of mine who had been taking drugs and walking on a freeway and be hit by a truck to only find their body be decapitated. I know it's pretty gruesome, and I'm being quite open, but I'm trying to make sure you understand. You know, I talk freely about this now and openly about this because I don't want to see other people go down that path. And that's my message, and why I work so deeply and why I work so closely with Draz now, to try and prevent other people from going down that pathway. I talk about, again, the gentlemen, or not so much gentlemen, the boys that I used to hang out with, you know, the lifestyle, the gang that we used to be in. It was nothing good, you know, it was nothing positive, it was just all money. That was essentially all that was ever spoken about. Some of those boys are in prison now, and particularly 4 of them are doing a sentence that they've been in prison for almost 5 to 6 years now and haven't been sentenced because the crime that they committed was so horrific that they're still trying to put it all together. So now I can sort of, like Father asked me, I can start to talk about it more freely now because the guys who did this particular crime have confessed to it, and it's been plastered all over the news and TV and YouTube and everything else. So, you know, they've confessed to it and they've committed to the crime, so that sort of puts me and a few other people out of the limelight. So it means that I can actually talk about it, which also helps, again, the youth and younger people. You know, we're trying to make sure that they understand there isn't always a limelight to this bad boy image that you see, or to all the underbelly stuff that you see on TV. I can't begin to tell you how blessed I am that I'm not in prison myself right now. People were praying for me, God was listening. It's so easy to get caught up in the hype and, you know, the limelight of that particular lifestyle. And it's very easy to be attracted to it. It's very, very attractive, you know, all the money and the bling and everything else that comes with it. You know, again, I mentioned those particular guys are in prison now, but who's really suffering? One of them has a young child. At the time that he was arrested, the child was 3 years old. I've now got an 18-month-old and a 4-month-old. So I could never ever imagine myself being away from my 2 children. It kills me to even think of this. It was always a consistent push to try and prove yourself. Trying to prove yourself to the community, trying to prove yourself to other groups, other bikie groups, other brotherhoods, whatever you want to call it. But what I found through this journey in my life, and through the persecution that I saw in the Middle East, was that I really didn't have to prove myself to anyone. I had to prove myself to God, because I was given so much. And when I talk about given so much, the poem that I spoke about, or I read in the beginning, we're talking about not only us as Maronites, or me as a Maronite, but the Serbian Orthodox community who were persecuted immensely, massively. We were given so much, yet I'm trying to prove myself to the wrong people. I should be proving myself to the church. I should be being so thankful for the church and for the people who laid their lives down for me to give me what I have. Like Draz mentioned earlier, I was a part of a group called Brothers United in Christ. We were a formation of, at the very beginning, there was probably about 10 of us. It was after the persecution in the Middle East that brought a lot of young men. You won't believe it if I tell you now that there's a revolt in people coming back to the church. You might think it's funny, and people who look like me who are coming back to the church. Because when I first walked into our church, which is Our Lady of Lebanon in Harris Park, people would stop and stare because I'm covered in tattoos. Now it's just a normal view when you see people like myself walk back into the church, because people have turned. And the foundation was started from this group that I talk about, because men were no longer judged by their appearance coming into a church, which was very, very, I guess, people, if they weren't comfortable, they weren't going to come back. So forming this mass was another way to try and get guys to come back to church. Come back in a less, I guess, in-your-face way. You know, they're not going to feel, they're not going to feel awkward. But in the process of this, we managed to raise anywhere up to about $100,000 in support and relief for people in the Middle East. It was a massive turning point for me in my life. Seeing the persecution in the Middle East was what really, really made me separate myself from the guys that are now in prison. And it wasn't only the fact that I saw what was happening in the Middle East that really burnt something deep in my heart that I'd never ever felt before. Honestly, I feel like just now I well up, because thinking of the persecution that I saw and that we heard about was, if I didn't change myself, then what was it all for? These people were dying for our sake. And they say the church is built on the blood of the martyrs. And if we don't change, then it's all for nothing. So it was at that point that I separated myself from that particular group. And it was at that point that I did meet Draz, our brother. And our lives have been absolutely blessed, working together, working to try and prevent other youngsters and even adults at times. Draz and I both work together to meet with adults, men, women, to try and help them overcome issues that they're currently got going, which is very normal. We've all got equal opportunities in life. It just depends what we want to make of it. These youngsters that Draz talks about in his program, we're trying to encourage them, again, not to go down that path. I'll give you a little snapshot, sorry, I jump between things. I'll just give you little snapshots between my story and my journey, but this is why we're so, pushed to try and help these young children, because it only takes a split second for something to go wrong. You can be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that could be a life-changing for the worst within an instant. So we try and speak about these things. I talk very freely. Please, guys, you're more than welcome to ask me questions. Be mindful I might not answer them, depending on what you ask. But yeah, you're very welcome to ask me questions. I'll get Draz to come up back now. We can sort of bounce off each other a bit more.
Simon's very humble when he talks. Like the young person that we helped out had massive drug issues, and Simon gave him so many chances in regards to getting his life on track. But unfortunately, the environment that you live in, I see it on a regular basis because I'm a police officer. So he would go home, he would get paid. When he would go home, his mum would ask for money.
His mum was a nice addict as well, just to know.
So he would have pressure from his mother coming home, and Simon and I tried to put some plans in place and some goals, set some goals for him to save some money. We opened up a bank account along those lines, tried to bring him to the church and see the better life. But unfortunately, he was with us for only a couple of hours, and he would go home and spend more time with his mother and his brothers, and they would manipulate him and take the money off him. And that's a constant thing that's happening every day with the kids that we work with. These young children want to have a life. They want to grow up, get married, and have a family. Because I would always ask them the questions. What do you want to do? I want to get married, I want to have a family. What kind of job? Doesn't matter. As long as I have some kids, have a family, have a beautiful wife, and continue on. But they live in such an environment that they think taking drugs, staying out all night is normal. Yeah, someone said they're a product of their own environment. This is happening, like I said, on a regular occurrence. I see it day in, day out. I have a few kids that I'm working with at this present time. One has a heart condition and is regularly taking drugs. I have parents ringing me up, crying, asking for assistance. During the Christmas period and New Year's period, Simon and I will be working, volunteering our time, which we'll say, because we will know that we'll have approximately maybe 30 to 40 kids on suicide watch. So we can get phone calls any time in the morning asking for assistance. That's a fact. Suicide is on the rise here. We, Simon and I, and as a community, we have to work together. And always, and as Father Nenad will know, always ask, request, respectfully request the parents, bring your children to church on a Sunday. Let them partake in the Holy Sacraments of the church, Holy Confession, Holy Communion. It's hard for me, being a police officer, and I see the kids coming to my office and cry, asking for assistance. And all the kids they just want is love. Someone to listen to them. I have 4 boys, of Polynesian background, very strong parents, asking for my assistance to get jobs. But a couple of the parents want them taken back to New Zealand because they think they'll live a better life over there. You know, without the church, we have nothing. You know, the majority of the people here that we eat today are church-going people. You know, so I'm preaching to people who go to church. You know, I would have loved if we had, you know, hundreds of kids here with their parents who need help. Let's face it. Some parents sometimes are in denial. A lot of kids do have mental health issues. But we are here to support. As Simon mentioned, the work he did with the kids, with the groups, Brothers United in Christ in the Middle East, helping the persecuted Christians in the Middle East. There were like 2,000, 3,000 people at a mass, and we had young kids come up to us then who needed assistance. So it's scary out there that we have kids who, especially in Parramatta and Manchester, Sydney, are sleeping under benches. As my dear friend Brother Nicola will know, works in Parramatta. We work together on projects. Sleeping under benches, under bridges, have no food. I have kids coming to my office asking for food. You won't see that in the news. Across the road, PCYC, Blacktown, kids come and use the showers because they've got no place to have a shower. It's a sad state of affairs if we've got kids coming into our club just to use the shower. But thank God we have a club that they can utilise. I'm very grateful, and I thank God every day for Him giving me the opportunity and giving me the talents that I have to help people out. Is it hard? Yes. It's very hard. I just also like to thank, I just put it on the record, I just like to thank my beautiful wife as well. Because sometimes, as Father Nenad knows, sometimes I'm not home. The majority of the time I'm not at home. And she's very understanding. She's obviously, as Father Nenad did speak about earlier, about love, true love, and then what we witnessed with Vedran and his wife today. I'm very thankful that she's very understanding and supportive at the same time. She just give me a call and say, she knows, she just give me a call and she goes, are you at church? Yeah. Yeah, the club, this was, yeah. Got your sign, we're helping some kid out, yeah. But I'm thankful that my wife is very understanding, but it's like I said, his father, Nenad did say, that's true love. And she's got her own story to tell. But with Simon's brother, Khoury, I mentioned earlier, he did come up to me once and ask for assistance in regarding some issues that he had, and with a friend, and his friend came here to church, and he walked into our church, and I think it's the first time he's walked in an Orthodox church, and he goes, oh, I like the paintings. Oh yeah. Just let me stand. Oh, it's really, really peaceful when I'm coming into church. Okay, yeah. And he's Maltese. You know what I'm talking about. And he just needs some sisters going through a hard time. And I said to him, mate, just put God in your life. Just go back to basics. Just go back to the church. Start off again. And he was going through a hard time. And thank God that he's put his life back on track. Research has consistently highlighted the problematic cause between the police, parents and police. Show of hands, who's had some bad experience with police? Anyone? Okay, your father was a police officer, okay. It's very understanding, okay. Yeah, right. I do apologise. I always ask that question. If someone's had bad experience with police officers. They have bad interactions with police and young people. People are often characterised by conflict and tension, and with very high levels of anger, fear and mistrust on both sides, with the police and the young person and parents. For the young person to get more involved, not just with police or just with any organisation with Simon, they have to have a positive interaction. And that's why, positive engagement, that's what we try to do and try and bring it back into the church. This is, like I said, from Simon's, I thank God that Simon's, dark side that he had in the past, the dark later side, as maybe his Father Nenad would describe it. Our paths, I thank God our paths crossed, and we've developed a rapport that when we speak to kids, obviously they tend to go to Simon because they love his tattoos, and they talk about his experience, and they think, because I'm a clean cut and a police officer, I don't worry about him, just go to the rebel, speak to the rebel.
Just has tattoos.
So,
just so you know.
They're painted on, so. As I reflect my 20 years of policing in various fields, I consider it natural to question whether I make a difference. To answer that question, I think of the children in broken homes who I have cared for and realise that I saved a life. I think of the cycles of domestic violence, abuse that I have broken by removing the offenders from homes, and realise that maybe I saved a life. I think of the thousands of tens of thousands of intoxicated drivers who have been taken off the roads, and realise that maybe I saved a life. And yes, I think of each of the individual actions of my actions when I joined as a police officer, and realise that, yeah, maybe I did save a life, but the stats will never show. We do not know those victims or their families would have been. In some way, they don't even know who they would have been. But the victims are certainly out there. And I'm honoured and I thank God every day that I'm given an opportunity that I can help a young child or help a family. My words, whether poorly described or eloquently articulated, offered on behalf of Simon and I here today, that I know we prevent heartache, and we do hopefully we do save some lives out there. Now we use the term hero to you loosely here in Australia, especially in Australia and even in America. Sporting people are heroes, actors are heroes, certain politicians are heroes, professional athletes are heroes. And while such individuals might have a unique and signal ability, while on occasion even engage in heroic efforts, to me they're not the true heroes. The true heroes are the parents, the mothers, the fathers out there. They're the true heroes. They want to help their kids. They talk with them every day, no matter what secrecies they might have or abilities or even disabilities they might have. They're the true heroes. In every community in New South Wales, and even in Australia, around the world, there are people like myself and Simon that are trying to help people, and they're changing their lives. We try to teach them the skills of leadership, church life, help them to build character, integrity, to make it this world, the world that we live in, a better place. I'd like to end just with a little poem that's called The Job I Do. So, the job I do. You can't understand the job I do, so what's different, you ask, of me than you? You see beauty of life each and every day, and some take for granted the part I play. You can go home and leave your troubles behind, but I am who I am no matter the time. To carry a gun and not to abuse it, to pray to God I won't have to use it. Every day I'm willing to risk my life, wondering if again I'll see family, friends and my wife. In blue, I'm pretty easy to see, so there's really never a safe place for me to be. When you see danger, you can run and hide, but I have ethics and I wear the uniform with pride. To go to work knowing this could be the day when some crazed lunatic might blow you away. To care for the injured, to deal with the dead, to deliver a death message is what I truly dread. So what's different, you ask, of you than me? I'm willing to give my life for you, will you for me? Thank you for your patience and gracious attention. I know it's a sensitive topic, but we thought, Simon and I thought, look, we just have to get out there and start telling the people what we do. But once again, I do really appreciate you guys being here today. On behalf of the parish board, Father Nemanja, and the ladies, without their support, the fantastic ladies at the back, this event will take place. But once again, thank you very much, and thank you, brother, for coming along. Thank you. Any questions? That means it's over, guys. Father Nenad started clapping. He's been quite kind to me. Thanks, Father.
Thank you, Draj. Thank you, Simon. That was thank you both for your presentation. That was very helpful, I believe, for all of us, and I hope that we take something out of all these presentations today, and we plant it as a seed in our heart, and we hope that it brings good fruit for our future. Just a few closing remarks. I would like to thank God for another opportunity, another year to have this seminar, have this gathering here. I would like to thank our bishop who came and supported us today and offered his blessings and his wonderful opening remarks. Also all of the clergy that came today and showed support. Father Miodrag, our Sydney Dean, and Father Alexander from Rudy Hill, who was here today, Father Nicola from Cabramatta, and Father David, of course, from the Russian Orthodox Church. And I would especially like to thank our guests who came all the way from Europe only for this gathering today, and for you, for your benefit, as well as Anna, who flew in from Melbourne and then flew back to Melbourne to be with her kids. It's not easy. And I have to thank again our wonderful sponsors that made this possible. As I said, Mr. Anthony Jeffries and the Orthodox Funerals, they were pivotal for today's organization. It costs a lot of money to organize this, not only bringing guests from overseas and taking care of them, but also everything that is included in today. It costs a lot of money, and money does not come easy in churches these days. Miss Television, very grateful to you. Wonderful, and your support means a lot to us, and we are inspired by it. Thank you so much. I have to thank Bell Radio and Bell Travel that helped a lot as creative source, Mira, who took photos, of course, today and developed all the beautiful artwork that we had. A lot of our funds went into advertising to inform as much people as we could about this. We know for a fact that some 5,000 people received repeatedly the information flyer about today. 5,000 individuals, 90% of them Serbian Orthodox and others Orthodox or Christian as well. And of course the Vesti, the newspaper that supported us as well. We're already thinking about next year and next year topics, and I invite you as well to help us with that. Some of the topics that we are developing or thinking about are online security and parenting online, sort of say, choosing a school for your children, Christian education, and of course marriage, family life, divorce, topics like this. It is important that you get involved in this process and that you tell us what is important for you, what would you like to hear about. It is also important for us, for all of us, to be constructive and to work together. If we can't change the past, we can change the future. The past of our community is a past of suffering, and it wasn't easy for our forefathers. But when we look around, look at this beautiful hall and this church, it was built in a time that was much harder than today is. It was much harder to build all this, and they made it because they sacrificed a lot for us, for our future. And now at least some of their children their offspring, and at least some of those new who came here as refugees recently have a place of gathering and have a place where they can discuss these issues that are confronting us. Well, we are now stepping into the unknown, and we have to find our way in the future that is not as predictable as it was maybe 20, 30 years ago. Thank God that we don't have a new wave of immigration from our lands, and because it usually means war and suffering and bad stuff happening over there that we want to avoid. But we do have generations and generations of people that are born here and raised here, and we have to find a way of keeping them close to their church, to their identity, to their future. We have to all get actively involved. It is very, very hard to organize something like this. I can't even begin to explain to you how hard and how much time it takes. And not only for the people that are, you know, setting up chairs and cooking and getting everything organized, but for their families as well. It might be stupid to talk about, but my personal example is probably something that I know best. Just to say that last week, and I've started actively promoting this seminar back in July, but just in the last week, I've spent maybe an hour and a half with my kids. I have 3 children. And all that time, I miss them. Can we go to ads and then come back?
Luckily there is no music playing, like for English, no music.
Well, they miss me too, and it's hard for my wife. And we have people that need this, but they're not here today. And they have to hear this, but they don't care. And we have to find a way of outreach to them and let them know that it's important for them. We need more people to sacrifice. We need more people to get involved. I know it's hard. I know you have families and careers and other issues in your life, but we all do. And if we want any future for us, we all have to be involved. If we want any sort of results, we have to work as a church, as a group. We have to support each other. We have to develop the gifts that we received from God so that we can grow and that we can at least try and work together. It's very important for me that there were some priests here today from the Serbian church. We need a support network that was shown by this last topic. We need to find a way to pull up all of us closer to God. When we start sacrificing our own days, our own lives, our own individual needs and the needs of our families, then God will show us reward and He will help us to rebuild our lives. If we only leave it to a few individuals, then it will turn into something private, into something fruitless and meaningless. Last night we had about close to 100 kids here in this hall dancing folklore, Serbian dances, all of their parents sitting here, having drinks, enjoying. In 5 to 10 years, 95% of those parents will come to this church crying, asking for help. And if they were here today, 50% of them could have helped themselves already today. We have to realize how important and how significant and how urgent these topics are. Family is the base of our life. Once we lose this basic unit, we are lost forever. There's no individual Christian. We can't be Christians on our own. I have my own spirituality. I talk to icons. I'm okay. It doesn't exist. It's just lying to yourself. We have to realize that we are a family and that we cannot afford to work separately or to sabotage one another, because that is it brings disastrous results for the whole community and for the whole church. Just imagine how beautiful would it be if we started doing these seminars, something like this, in the early 60s. And that if each generation that passed through these churches, if we kept 10% of these people, how many of us would it be here today? How easy would it be for us to organize anything that we want, to provide programs for our kids, to save them from these issues that are happening? How easy would it be? We have opportunities that are more acceptable, more close to us here than the people who live in Serbia, in the old country. For them it's even harder than for us. Yet we tend to ignore it. There's a lot of people here today that sat throughout the whole day and they don't speak a word of English. And they were working tirelessly yesterday and today so that everyone would have a chair to sit on, clean hall, something warm to eat, feel a bit of hospitality, and find that touch of the Holy Spirit that happens when we gather as a church. And it is sad that sometimes when our church bells go on, our people who live nearby complain because we wake them up too early. Because we're not waking them up too early, it is already too late for some of us. So it is very important, and I urge you and appeal to all of you again, don't miss any Sunday. Go to church every Sunday. Pray. Come to your priest. Ask him, what can I do?
I don't like the priest.
Especially to the priest that you don't like. Now that's a fair topic. There is, like Draj asked, who had a bad experience with police officer? Who had a bad experience with a priest? Most of my bad experience comes from priests. But imagine if we all went to those priests that we have the worst possible experience with, and if we all went to them and showed them love and compassion, and we helped them in their life. I honestly don't believe that any of them would be capable of returning back anything else but love. And they don't have to be perfect, but if they have that feeling in them, if they can do something for us, if they can do something good for them, we're all winners. So we need all of us to take this seriously, not just today, but to the rest of our life, that every chance we miss in our life is our last chance. And we just missed our last chance. And there's no second chance. This is it. So we need to develop our gifts. We need to develop this support network. We need to develop ourselves as church. as the spiritual stones being built into a spiritual church, temple. And we need to keep this alive for our kids. And we need to invite others. All these talks, all these seminars, tomorrow there'll be another one in Serbian, then throughout this Christmas Nativity Lent, each Saturday we have a lecture here. We have youth gatherings, youth fellowships. We have playgroups for kids. There's always something going on because we are desperately trying to bring anyone in. And we need everyone who gets touched by the church to get mobilized by the church, to become a soldier of church, and to do everything, sacrifice everything else for this, because this is not just some ideology. This is not something that is, good for our community. This is something that is crucially important for your salvation, for your soul, for your life, and not only for your 50 or 60, 70 years here on earth, but for your eternal life. Where will you be in 500 years, in 5,000 years? Will you be sorry for missing the last chance? Please, let's take these seeds that are given today and plant them everywhere we can. And there will be some good land somewhere. And people will rise, and people will come, and whoever raises their hands to God, God will pick them up. We need our church to become the church. We can't be a social club. We can't just have concerts. There's plenty of concerts tonight in the Serbian community. I can bet my life that each and every one of them will have 10 times more people there than here today. And I can also bet my life that none of them will get anything beneficial for their souls out of all of that, not even close to what all of you received today. So what we receive today, we need to share with others, and we need to bring more people in. We need to have not just more people in so that we can have a photo with them and say, look how successful we are, but more people in that their lives can be changed. They can find Christ, they can find their path to salvation. This is why we were put here on this earth. This is what we live for. This is the meaning of our life. Anything else is dust. So, sorry for taking so much time. No one likes when the pork gets cold, but there's no pork today. But yeah, I had to say it. And once again, thank you all for your support. You can't imagine how appreciated it is. Thank you all for your hard work. Nada, thank you for coming all this. And I hope I'll see you all next year as well.